Brooks G. Let's go. What's up? Let's go. Saturday night. We're doing a little Saturday night streaming. It's called a little Saturday night streaming. We do a little Saturday night streaming. Tonight, we're covering the book, 6 Days of the Condor. This is different from the film, 3 Days of the Condor. We're also going to cover 3 Days of the Condor, the classic Robert Redford, Sidney Pollack movie. And we're going to base this in the novel by James Grady, 1974. This is an interesting take because, we're a literature channel here and we usually cover the canon. This one obviously is outside the canon, but it's still literature. So I thought that we would cover it because, you know, I, I'm sure a lot of people are interested in spy novels. I mean, that's especially as a dude, that's sort of par for the course. So I thought I would go back and, take a look at the original material for this movie because I happened to catch 3 Days of the Condor, a couple days ago, and it's a revelatory movie in so many ways. It's revelatory, it's predictive. It's the only movie to be filmed inside the, Big 9 World Trade Center. Did you know that? So we're gonna cover this book, and it's interesting because the book also touches on Alfred McCoy's classic book, The Politics of Heroin, um, Southeast Asia book, magnificent tome. I got it in the other room. I should have brought it out here. But couple other books that this stream is going to touch on. I mean, this book really plays into the same sort of universe as of all books, Tom Clancy's Without Remorse, and I'm not like a big Tom Clancy fan or anything. I mean, if someone is, that's cool. I've always thought of Tom Clancy books as the kind of book that, your dad picks up like in the 80s at the airport and reads on the plane and finishes before you get to the Bahamas. At least that's the way that my dad did it. So, but I went back and a couple years. Well, I read it in 2015. This is a great book. I mean, if you're going to read one Tom Clancy novel, this is the book to read. And of course, they made the what was it, Amazon series with, Michael B. Jordan. I like Michael B. Jordan, but the series completely changes the book, and that's gonna tie into this because in the same way that Without Remorse, the novel was changed, or the Amazon series, the movie 6 Days of the Condor was also changed. It's the same thematic material. So, I thought that was interesting. Another book that you might enjoy if you like this sort of genre would be this Jack Higgins novel. It's called A Season in Hell, and I like this book because I picked it up because of the content. It deals with Northern Ireland, but also I like the title because it's the same title as Arthur Rimbaud's. Um, it was it. Let's see. He wrote that in what 1871. Anyway, Rimbaud is one of my literary heroes, one of my favorite poets. He is my favorite poet. So A Season in Hell is an apt title for this book. So I would check this one out. But we're not a book recommending stream or a book review stream. We're trying to do deeper analysis here, and we're also going to dive into films. So I thought this would fit with the Robert Redford CIA trilogy because he's really done he's really done 4 movies that deal with, the intelligence world. The 4th would be the movie Lions for Lambs, um, which is the Tom Coon movie, which came out in, like, 2008. I'm not gonna cover that one, because it's sort of outside the purview of this one, but it still sort of deals with the same material. That one's got Tom Coon and, like, Meryl Streep, Lions for Lambs. You guys heard of that band, One Day as a Lion? Right? Better to live one day as a lion than a lifetime as a lamb. Achilles, right? Yeah, the band is Zach De La Rocha's like offshoot band after Rage Against the Machine. They've got an EP. It's 5 songs. It's not bad. So anyway, we're gonna cover the CIA trilogy of Robert Redford tonight, the films. So we're gonna do 3 Days of the Condor, Sneakers, and Spy Game. And Sneakers really is my favorite of these three because it is all three of these are great films. Spy Game is not a great film, but it is a good film, and it's also interesting because it came out in November of 2001, 2 months after Big 9 event, and I remember seeing it at the time, and actually, when I lived in Malaysia for a summer, I was I you go you so in Malaysia, like, you go to, these malls in KL, and they are like massive 9-story like techno malls. Like there's one at the base of the Petronas Towers, and they sell DVDs, but they're all like plastic DVDs cases you would get, let's say, in the subway in New York. And one of the first ones that I found that was in English was the movie Spy Game, and I got it for 3 ringgit or something. And so I watched it because it sort of it reminds you of home or whatever in terms of you want when you're living abroad you want something American. So sometimes to make you feel like home. So I got Spy Game, and it's actually it's a pretty good book, and it's good for a number of things. Number one thing that I realized about these 3 books is that or these 3 movies is that Robert Redford's character, he essentially plays the same character in all 3 movies. Now, that's not just because, he's a leading actor and, like, you can't help but see Robert Redford, but it's actually because his character, Bishop, in, Sneakers, it's almost like we get a flashback in Sneakers, so it starts off with him and this other guy, Cosmo, who's gonna actually end up being Ben Kingsley, and they sort of start off as, like, Weather Underground, boomer guys, and they're inside a bank. Actually, the movie starts inside the bank, the same bank where Back to the Future is filmed, right, with the lightning storm, and they're, like, hacking into the computer systems, and they are taking money from, like, I don't know, the RNC, and they're donating it to, like, Greenpeace or whatever. So they're kinda like Weather Underground guys, and they're later on, Robert Redford will say, it was a prank, but his character in that, it's almost like he goes from that you can imagine in the world of these 3 movies that he goes from that to then being recruited by CIA and working in the literary society that he does in the beginning of, 3 Days of the Condor, and so then he's a CIA guy, but he's kind of a literary guy, and then he gets into, like, major operations of Spy Game. Spy Game, it's kind of incongruous because Spy Game also has an element where he's back in Vietnam, so it could be in the '70s, it would be a little later than when he was it's sort of in terms of the timeline. But, Spy Game's interesting because the movie starts off that also has a flashback where he goes back and it goes back in time, and he not literally like Back to the Future, it's just a flashback, but he meets Brad Pitt's character, who is a Marine Scout sniper, and he recruits him for the Phoenix program. And Brad Pitt's character in that is named Bishop. And my theory is that it's not really a theory, but my sort of take is that Brad Pitt's career is the same trajectory as Robert Redford. He's essentially a neo Robert Redford. And that's because Hollywood and films, they always have these archetypes, right? They have types of actors that are gonna play this sort of same roles, and he, in a way, plays many of the same kind of roles. He has the same kind of image as Robert Redford does, and I could see as Brad Pitt keeps aging in movies that he'll start to be a sort of a he's not quite the, like, East Coast, literary patrician that Robert Redford is. I mean, Brad Pitt's almost like a West Coast version of Robert Redford, but they're essentially like the same character. And Spy Game plays on that because he's going to end up being his mentor. So then he recruits him to the CIA, he goes through his operations in that movie. And then we can see that, like, as time passes on, he ends up as a kind of a contractor, the contractor that he does for sneakers. Sneakers is great because number 1, River Phoenix is in it, and he's awesome. I mean, like, I love River Phoenix. He's so cool. He's so cool in this movie. He died a year after the movie. But Sneakers is really the best of this trilogy. I mean, it is really a phenomenal movie. I would say in many ways it's a perfect film because it, like, sort of is this territory between the analog world and the digital world. It's a hacker movie, but it's not like a Hackers hacker movie, and Hackers is a cool movie too, I mean, obviously. That's more of a '90s, teen, like, techno thriller, but Dan Aykroyd's in the movie. Dan Aykroyd plays a kind of a I mean, if you were in this movie, like, in the world, like, let's say this movie was like the world, and you went to a cocktail party and Dan Aykroyd's character, Mother, was there, any of us would get along with him, because he's pretty funny. He's like a meme in the movie. He's very much, AJ territory in the movie, so he's pretty cool. Um, and Sidney Poitier's in it. Ben Kingsley's fantastic because he plays kind of a proto Sigma character who who is looking for this black box, a black cube that is going to be the Snowden cipher that can code break anything in the world. And essentially, he's like an uber socialist in the world of like he's it's like Ben Kingsley and Hans Gruber are sort of the same ilk, sort of a techno terrorist. So, Sneakers is a fantastic movie, 1992, you gotta watch it, and of course, when that movie came out I'm gonna get to the analysis, I'm just kinda riffing right here on the movies, but, when that movie came out, I remember because I was at the West Tower Cinema in Richmond, and I just gotten out of something, and we were walking out, and they had put up the giant poster for Sneakers coming out, it was 1992, and I remember looking at it and thinking the poster looked really cool because you could tell it was a spy movie, and I was, like, 11 or 12 years old, and I was confused by the title because I thought it had something to do with sneakers, even though, like, I don't know about you guys, but when I was younger, I never called sneakers sneakers. I called them tennis shoes. That's just what you call them in the South. But I thought it was about sneakers, River Phoenix has on this starter hat, like a San Francisco 49er starter hat. So it was like, oh, Joe Montana. I thought that was really cool when I was like 12. But anyway, um, looking back at it now as a grown up, you go back and watch the movie, and it's amazing how revelatory it is. Same with 3 Days of the Condor. So let's start off by looking at 6 Days of the Condor. This is James Grady's 6 Days of the Condor. Shouts out to my dad who sent me this overnight. It's hard to get. It's hard to find. I think I told you guys, I went to Barnes and Noble looking for this book, and they gave me hell about it because they didn't know what I was talking about. They were like six. Yes, the word six. They thought that I said something like sex days of the condom, but it's 6 days of the condor. I mean, the blue haired lady was looking at me like crazy because I wasn't there to buy a Funko Pop, so I didn't really fit the clientele, I guess. Um, but so it's a short novel. You can read it in about, I mean, you can read it in like a couple hours. And somebody asked in the chat earlier, does this have anything to do with condor, South American condor? Well, yeah, I mean, it does because, excuse me. It does because even though it's not about um, the Operation Condor in South America and the overthrowing of Allende and the installation of Pinochet and that eventually tying in with Contras and CIA operations in South America, especially tied in with Klaus Barbie. Um, I have two biographies in there of Klaus Barbie. He's an interesting one to cover, and Jay's covered him, in depth. And Condor. Condor also makes you think of the Condor Legion. Condor Legion, remember, was I know everybody knows this here, but Condor Legion was the name of the Luftwaffe group that bombed Guernica. So during the Spanish Civil War, starting in 1936, remember Franco kind of outsourced and recruited the Hotler groups so that they would go in and be able to test their weapons and give the nationalists some assistance. The nationalists. Was it the Nationalists? Was Franco a part of the Nationalists? Yeah, Franco was a nationalist. Um, it's interesting because we talked about that in relation to Ernest Hemingway. Because remember, Hemingway actually fought. Well, he didn't fight for them, but he's some of his short stories and his later texts are about the Spanish Civil War. Did I say Spanish American War earlier? If I did, sorry, too many terms going through my head. Spanish Civil War, 1936 to 1945. I've got a good, biography of, Franco in there as well. It's about 800 pages. I read it one summer, sitting at the beach. I went to the beach, with the fam, and I remember sitting there on the beach and tearing through this thing. I always do that. People ask me about people in the thank you for leaving comments after the videos. Like and share the stream, you guys, please, and leave me some comments. People always, not always, but I've gotten many comments and messages and emails about recommended reading and how to read. And I appreciate those comments. I don't really address them because I think that on the one hand, it's like I'm sort of incorporating those as answers through our regular streams anyway, but also because you know, we're I don't really wanna answer questions, for, like, younger people, for instance. They're not in the audience, but, and you can tell, like, I don't really that's not really our area here. We're all grown A people here, and, I think that the main thing if I were gonna answer those questions, I would say, um, if I had any ad like if I had anything to say about that, not advice, I'm not one to give advice or fucking take it. Excuse my language. But because we're all grown people, we know what to do. But unless it's solicited advice, right? But I'm not one to give advice. But I would say that the main thing about reading is that there are I've this is kind of the point of the channel, right? Is that there are so many things out there. There's an information overload and an infinite scroll and ubiquitous technocracy everywhere. And so one just has to have sort of peace of mind and discernment and to be able the ability to be able to pick and choose and to use technology for what it's worth, right? And I think that reading um, is an invaluable thing that is going away. Certainly, it's obviously going away now. People kind of act like, oh, people read more back in the day. Well, they did and they didn't, right? Because even if there was no internet and no technology, I mean, reading is something that it's something that has to be cultivated. And it really starts if you didn't get it as a young age, which is fine, and you're now a grown up and you want to get into books, and that's cool. I guess I would just say find the thing that you want to read about. Don't take recommendations from people. Don't, it'll never work. That never works. Like you have to go on your own little trip. You have to go on your own journey and find the things that you like. And sometimes recommendations are great, but reading is so personalized that it's hard to determine what a person's going to like. Like again, if you're into if you're let's say you're a grown man and, you like reading about espionage, then find a good spy book, and I guess, what if I'm not gonna really recommend, but if I could recommend some, it would be the ones that I just talked about. Jack Higgins, A Season in Hell, read John le Carré, go watch Where Eagles Dare, read Tom Clancy Without Remorse, read 6 Days of the Condor. If you like reading nonfiction, which is actually what I like reading more, because I know that this is our literature channel, but in my own life, people ask me like what I like to read, outside of the stream. And the thing I most like to read is history. I'm mostly reading nonfiction and history. So read about the things that you want to read about. I mean, I think that nonfiction is a much more is it has its own value because you're reading about it, the truth is stranger than fiction. Yes, that's true. But it's more complex than that. And I think that in order to understand the way that the world works and to form your worldview and to understand other people's paradigms, you have to read history. The past is prologue, as I've said many times. And fiction, though, which is probably my least favorite thing to read, even though I love reading it, but just in terms of the sort of ladder of what I like reading, it's probably the least favorite. But, uh, I think that you have to read fiction, again, with a discerning eye, and you have to understand form and content. And I think that if you aren't an active reader, and by active reader, I mean like you're interacting with the book. And the way to interact with the book is really if you didn't get that in your education, and that's cool because, people that get that are lucky, but, or a university education, like you have to interact with the book. And I'm lucky that I'm able to read and, have sort of an assault of media at the same time. I like noise and sort of chaos. Um, and I can read in the quiet too, but I like reading with music blaring, sometimes with a movie or just the television on in the background as noise and reading the book. I just like that. And so I think that if you're not like that or you don't read, then that's not the way in for you. You need to like, how do you read? You just make time. Everybody, all of us, we have time and we don't have time, like, simultaneously. It's this weird paradox where, like, I feel like I have all the time in the world to do stuff, but I also don't have time. But like a teacher once said to me a long time ago, if you want something done, give it to somebody who doesn't have time to do it. Because what that means is you have to manage your time. We all, are adults and we know how to manage our time in terms of our job. But it's like, even in the moments, I mean, like in your downtime or a few minutes between whatever when you're working, like I'm always reading. Now that's me, and that doesn't have to be anybody else, but reading like pulls me, it's a whole life. It pulls me in. That's what I've always liked to do that since I was very little, very young. I love reading. So I think that it's a valuable thing because yes, it exercises your mind, exercises your vocabulary, makes you a better human being. It allows you to hold 2 completely disparate ideas at the same time and be dispassionate about them. But you have to just sort of sink into the life of the book and go with it. Shouts out to Elias who sends 20 bucks in a super chat and says, "What's up, Based? Hope life is treating you well, my friend. Love this topic and enjoy digging deep into the matters here. God bless." Hey, thank you so much, Elias. Really appreciate you. Thanks for that super chat. If anybody wants to super chat, you can super chat right there. You just click that little YouTube money sign right there. You can hit the dono chat, you can you can donate in the other links. You can donate to me at any time. Please like and share the stream. So thanks, y'all. All right, so let's get into the book here. Enough babbling on about that. This is James Grady's 6 Days of the Condor. And this is a surprisingly good book. I mean, you never know what to expect. There are criticisms I have of it, and I'm going to get to those. But it's pretty cool. So it's published in 1974, and it's hard to find now. But I'm gonna take you through the intro and the preface because this is the nonfiction section of the book, because they're pretty revelatory for setting up the story. And what ends up happening is that the story fiction gives us a mirror and a parallel world for the truth. And they oftentimes will hit on the truth harder than nonfiction will. Nonfiction at times is analogous to the constant stream of information. You get constant streams of information, you get timelines, you get events, and but it's up to you to sort of pull truth out of that. But you're really looking at facts, and then non-factual information and having to determine which is which. But fiction is different because fiction, although it implies a non-truth or unreality, is actually much more truthful. Now, think about it. This is the reason why Um, CIA people write novels in their spare time. I mean, Howard Hunt did that. I've got his novel Cozumel down there, and he mentions Victor Marchetti in the intro to this book. Oftentimes, CIA has to do this, because if a person is ex CIA, which I don't believe is a thing, um, when they write books, of course, they have to submit the books and they have to have them approved by the company, right? Meaning the organization, the CIA apparatus. And so they can't hit on anything that's either non open source material or classified or top secret or any of that stuff. And the way they get around that is by giving parallels. Now, Jay obviously wrote 2 books about this. Esoteric Hollywood 1 and 2, and has talked in depth about Ian Fleming. And Ian Fleming is probably the best example of that. There are others. And now this one's interesting because James Grady tells us that he is not part of this of the IC, right? But actually then he goes on to say that he was working for a was it a senator, and that he became part of the sort of apparatus later. So so the question is whether that is a cover or not. What is the book a sort of double bind? Is it a double cover? Right. So I'm going to take you through some of the intro to this book because I think you guys will find this pretty interesting. He starts off by saying every novel is cradled by history. True. Great first sentence. This is as true for 6 Days of the Condor that I wrote on a battered manual typewriter in the depths of the Cold War as it is for any novel being written today on a flickering personal computer while trucks haul away the rubble of the Berlin Wall. So he wrote this intro. It shows you how the book hasn't been updated. He wrote this intro in, I think, 1990. And what's interesting is that the events of the movie, which changed the events of the book, um, reflect back and mirror the oil crisis. So the oil crisis turns into the oil wars, turns into Desert Storm, and so forth. He says Condor was written to Paranoia's Metronome, 1972. Hydrogen bombs were poised to fall. J. Edgar Hoover's FBI knew everything about everybody. Mainland China was inscrutable. The Soviet Union was an evil gulag wasteland behind an iron curtain. Made in Japan wasn't funny anymore. Hitler might not be hiding in Paraguay, but the escaped Nazi network Odessa had fanatic operatives in Swiss banks and at remote communes. So I've got a great book in there by Uki Gonyi called The Odessa Network. We should take a look at that sometime. Israeli Avengers stalked the globe. They got Eichmann. They could get anybody. Apartheid bedeviled South Africa. South American drug dealers were still small time businessmen, but the Godfather had a French connection and no one dared refuse his offers. Terrorists were more than likely called revolutionaries. Um, you never knew where they'd strike or who they'd kill for certain why. Something called the ozone layer was in jeopardy because of what we sprayed in our armpits and the desperate search for love and social acceptance. So he's talking about the the cultural motifs and the way that the generation was defined by the things immediately preceding it. So sort of like apex, this is like apex boomer moment, post 60s, early to mid 70s, status quo in society. And that's interesting because I mean, Jay and I talked about that in our coverage of Network and how the 70s had a spate of films that dealt with paranoia and conspiracy because that was part of the it was not only part of the weather vane of the way that society was moving and how people thought about government, but more importantly, it's revelatory and predictive for the future. A third-rate burglary in Washington was turning President Nixon's men into dominoes, crashing ever closer to their commander in chief. While in Vietnam, TV clips of mountains and jungles, deltas and ancient cities, helicopters. My generation was in the 13th year of Americans killing and dying. Only the mad did not feel fear. I've got a great book on what was I going to say? Well, we've covered Will by G. Gordon Liddy and Watergate and the Plumbers, and now they just put out that series. I put it in the community tab. They put out that series on HBO about the Plumbers, which is not bad. I mean, it's obviously supposed to be a comedic version of it, but I like what's his name? Justin Thoreau. We talked about Thoreau a little bit in the Mosquito Coast analysis because his uncle, Paul Thoreau, wrote that book. Love and danger are the strongest intoxicants for a writer's imagination. Like most young men, I knew little about love. Well, that's by the way, that's evident in the book because there are some spicy scenes in the book which are absolutely ridiculous. Like mo He says, "Luckily, I knew enough not to indulge my ignorance in my prose." Well, he kind of did. Um, but danger in those electric times, a young writer with a fevered imagination needed to know very little to weave out a tale, out of thin air around him. I wrote Condor in 4 months, working a Montana day job and typing my heart out nights and weekends, approaching that first novel like the journalist I'd been schooled to be. I was 24 and didn't know how ridiculous it was to dream that I could write a book that would be published. In truth, the long odds of reality didn't matter. I had no choice about being a writer, about writing. That's pretty cool because I like that. I mean, I think that's probably truthful. And that goes with the territory of like the young writer writing his first novel, hoping to write the great American novel and actually in a way succeeding because they bought the rights and they made the film of it. And one thing that I found really interesting about this was that I like his attitude. I like Grady's attitude in this introduction because, you know, most writers will who have a film made of their book will bitch and moan about how they changed they changed his book and the content of his book and made a film that wasn't his, and sometimes they even go on to disown the film. And I've talked a bunch of times about how, listen, dumbass, don't sell the rights to your book if you don't intend for them to change it. You got to work harder at um, establishing the parameters for how you want your book to be made and establishing control. Otherwise, you sell your book and that's it. Right. Well, I like Grady's attitude because what Grady says is essentially that I wrote this book and they made a movie of it. And I love the fact that they made a movie of it because it ended up being something completely different from the book in many ways. But I respect the choices that they made. That's fine. See, I think that's kind of cool. It's like he's being a grown up about the artistic choices that he made and his business decisions. He says, "Good fiction is an ambush for both reader and author." Great sentence. That's absolutely true, and that will tie in with the content of the book. He says, "I walked the battleground ground that begat Condor a year before I started pounding my keyboard, 1971, the year of Jim Morrison's death, right? July 3rd. I was a college senior, a Sears congressional journalism intern, one of 20 Woodstock warriors. Unashamed boomer. That's yeah, that's kind of cool. Brought on fellowship from the hinterland universities of America to the wonders of Washington, D.C. There to work days on a congressional staff and be taught at night by a new genre of journalists called investigative reporters. That that's funny that the investigative reporter was not a thing till the 1970s, right? Really, that's a Watergate sort of creation. We do it live. We do it live. Fuck it. All righty, we'll do it live, right? Hard. No, it's not like none of you hard copy fellas. Remember hard copy? Investigative reports. When I hear investigative reports, I think of that song on the Jizza Genius album, Investigative Reports. Remember that? Shouts out to real John Connor out there. He'll know that one. I lived on A Street, southeast, 6 blocks from the white icing Capitol dome that looked even grander than it had on my high school civics textbook. I rented a third floor garret in a massive row house. A seldom seen man rented the other unit on my floor. At night, through the thin walls, I heard him coughing and wheezing, fearing tubercular. Okay, whatever. So he's talking about his life in DC. Now, um, have y'all ever been to DC? I'm sure probably everybody here, at least all the Americans, have been to DC. You probably went there on your field trips or you went there with the family. I have a I don't know, my take on DC is a little different maybe than other people. I mean, because, you know, the Pentagon and CIA are actually in the Virginia suburbs. I mean, McLean, Virginia, which is where a lot of the MIC is based, is in, that's it's in McLean, Virginia. McLean, Virginia has like more fiber optic cable running under it than I think any city in the world. It's huge. Now, NSA obviously is at Fort Meade in Maryland, but Maryland and Virginia, Northern Virginia, are essentially suburbs of DC. But DC, remember, was built in the swamps in Virginia. Um, and by the way, is laid out in a Sephiroth, inside of a cube, in the irrigated swamps right next to the Potomac. But DC is cool. I mean, because it's interesting because DC is only 2 hours away from me, but it feels like a completely different world and a completely different, it's a different state. I mean, it's DC's not a state, but it feels like a different state and it's like a different zone. It's like a totally different zone. And I if I'm gonna make a prediction, I predict, maybe not in our life, in my lifetime, but sometime I predict that Nova will break off and become its own state because it seems inevitable to me. If you lived in Virginia, you would understand this because Central Virginia and the East Coast, the Eastern Shore, and especially Southwestern Virginia are like, yeah, they're all sort of their own entities and different from each other. But Northern Virginia has become completely engulfed and swamped up by DC. So basically, it's kind of like New York being this giant magnet. And I have one of my friends worked in New York in the music industry, but lived in Philadelphia. I was living in New York, but did a play in New Jersey. Other people, tons of people live on the hinterlands and have to go into New York because it's so expensive. If you've ever been in the mixing bowl outside of DC on the DC Beltway, like, it's just absolute chaos. But it's cool because, you drive to Dulles and, like, that's where I would get my international flights, and you drive up 2 hours and you go to Dulles, and the Pentagon is, like, right there on the side of the highway. Um, Annapolis is Circle G sends $2. It says Annapolis is better. Annapolis is a beautiful city. The last time I went to Annapolis was for my, old friend's wedding, like 5 years ago. It's a beautiful city, and Annapolis does one of those things that a lot of cities a lot of places, especially in Virginia, like, didn't do well, which is keep the kind of old and the colonial architecture juxtaposed against the sort of newer architecture. I mean, Annapolis is analogous to Norfolk, really, but Annapolis is great. Um, Now, again, like Norfolk and Hampton Roads um and where else? Hampton Roads and Portsmouth and Virginia Beach are all kind of the same like mega city. They're all in one. SEALs are based at Virginia Beach, and that's cool because when you drive through the Techno Tunnel on your way to the Outer Banks, on the driving down the East Coast, in Virginia, and you go through that underground Techno Tunnel, you drive up right past the largest naval base in the world. It's absolutely enormous. But DC is interesting because I've been to DC like a bazillion times. One reason is because when I was a kid, at school, I went to prep school, and we would go all like, those were the best days because all the time it'd be like, "All right, tomorrow, don't forget, it's a field trip." And at my school, like, we all had to wear I went to an all-boys school, so we all had to wear the same uniform. Not a uniform, but it was a kind of uniform. We'd have to wear khaki pants and a white button-down shirt and a red, like, V-neck sweater with our logo on it. And then when you get older, you have to wear coat and tie. But we would always go to the Smithsonian or the National Aeronautics and Space Museum, or we one of the biggest memories is we went to Congress, and there was a Supreme Court justice who, I don't know if he went to my school, but he was an older fella, and he had something to do with my school. And then there was a I've got a picture of me meeting a congressman, this congressman who gave us a tour of the Capitol, and he went to my school. Um, and then there was one time when I was in upper school, which is what you call it, we went we went around to, I forget what museum, but then we went to the opening of, they had Planet Hollywood. It just opened. So we went to Planet Hollywood, the restaurant, and we were all sitting there, and one of these guys like our age walked in, and I remember friend Brad, well, I'll just say one of my friends, uh, he goes, "Give me a pen and a piece of paper." So we handed it to him, and he ran up to the guys, and he goes, "Hey, can I get your autograph?" And they were like, "Why?" They were from, I don't know where they were from, but he was like, they were like, "Why?" And he was like, aren't you guys new kids on the block?" These kids got so fucking mad, and I think they took a swing at him. And anyway, kind of, I don't know. That wasn't a very nice thing to do, but but it was funny as hell. Anyway, so that's a lot funnier to me in my mind than it is telling the story. I'm sorry. But anyway, so, yeah, we would go to DC all the time. I know I'm babbling here, but DC is its own thing, and I think that things like House of Cards, like, pretty do actually do a pretty good job. This movie actually, the movie version of this book, does a good job of illustrating the way that DC is this weird society where, um the common folk, the regular people, and the East Coast elites, and the journos, and the politicos, and intelligence all coexist in this one place, and they're all walking around amongst each other, and just out in the open. So it seems like when you think about it, that a lot of these people would have bodyguards, like if you just watch the movies all the time, but they don't. So anyway, so let me move on here. He says, later on, he says, let's see, I fell into the era's paranoia. What if when I came back from lunch, everyone in my office had been murdered? That's just one thing he thought. And that was the sort of the the seed of this novel. It could happen to anyone, but if it happened to a spy, he thought, because he says he like worked in this innocuous building, and he said, what if this building were a CIA front of some kind? He's just daydreaming. My fantasy about a covert CIA office in Capitol Hill was not without foundation in reality. In those days, a flat faced gray concrete building with an always lowered garage door and a windowless locked entrance sat amidst colorful liquor stores, restaurants, and bookstores along a strip of Pennsylvania Avenue that angled out from the Capitol and the House office buildings. No sign identified the concrete edifice to the congressional aides and tourists strolling past it every day, but several thousand of us shared the secret that the building belonged to the FBI. If you had enough official clout to ask the Bureau, you were told that the Capitol Hill office was one of their translation centers. That's pretty interesting. Sure, thousands of us thought, but what do they really do there? Conventional paranoia claimed that the building was the center for the Bureau's bugging of congressional offices and telephones, a nightmare the FBI vehemently denies, which is something that has come to light, especially recently in the last few years. The question of what the real spooks in the FBI were doing on Capitol Hill was quickly overshadowed, in my mind, by the question of what the CIA employees stationed in my Capitol Hill townhouse were doing. The reality of most espionage activity makes poor fiction. As President Johnson noted at the swearing in ceremony of CIA Director Richard Helms, most significant triumphs come not in the secrets passed in the dark, but in patient reading hour after hour of highly technical periodicals. Right. Which is like, remember in Point Break? Um, you know how we do it? You know how we solve all these crimes? By crunching data. Remember? Did he say data or data? John C. McGinley. By crunching data. I think it's crunching data. Which is kind of excuse me, which is kind of yes and no, right? That makes it seem like, oh, we don't do the big time operations that you think we do with like the spy games and the James Bond and all that. We just sit around analyzing data. Well, yes and no. I mean, but CIA as a whole directorate of operations with paramilitary groups that do those exact things, right? Richard Helms that he's talking about in this book, where is it? Yeah, right behind me, The Devil's Chessboard, which is probably my favorite book about CIA besides, I mean, Ghosts of Langley by Prados ties it into that. Prados died, I think last year, but both of those books talk about MK Ultra and Richard Helms in a kind of straightforward way that's pretty revelatory. And that's a great book. It's especially the book is mainly about Dulles, Alan Dulles, but it also hints on and talks about Richard Helms in detail. So I think that that also ties in with the banality of evil and that everything becomes so dispassionate and so data driven that it becomes like, oh, it's another operation, and that's kind of what happens in this, right? Morality goes out the window. I read an article this week about Jose Delgado from Smithsonian Institute that said it was titled like "In Praise of Delgado," and it said Jose Delgado was able to make breakthroughs in science and psychotronics and cybernetics because pesky, to paraphrase, pesky things like ethics and morality were sort of secondary to his research. Well, that's exactly what we're talking about, right? So he says, such ordinary reality is not the meat of drama. Drama occurs when reality breaks down or at the edge of the ordinary, where determined people confront cause and effect, deal with their consciences, and wrestle fate. He then talks about how the spy novel has had an evolution. This is pretty interesting because he says at that time, basically, there was Len Dayton, John Le Carre, Joseph Conrad, and Graham Greene. We covered Graham Greene. We covered what do we cover? We covered The Quiet American. We could probably do Our Man in Havana, but Graham Greene was MI6. Could be found on library shelves, but at bookstores, they were blanked out by the glitz of Dr. No, Goldfinger, From Russia with Love, Sean Connery and Ursula Andress, Sex, and the Walther PPK. Now that's true and not true. I mean, maybe it is true for most people, but I mean, every you know old guy's house that I was ever in terms of when I was growing up, or even my own house, with my dad, it's like, no, well, I can't really use that as an example because my dad is a massive library. And I guess everybody in my family does, but had all of these books, had Dulles and Howard Hunt's book and the book on Lucy, and there are plenty of CIA books. I guess it's what he's saying here though is that most people didn't have those books. If they had books at all, they kind of had the 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 airplane bookstore thriller, right? Shouts out to everybody in chat. We got 40 in chat right now. Please make sure you smash that like and share the stream. I appreciate y'all. So he says the Central Intelligence Agency, America's best known spy shop in those post McCarthy days when our murdered President John F. Kennedy had publicly loved James Bond and had been secretly entangled in best and brightest covert intrigues, the CIA was an invisible creature of mythic proportions. These days, entire bookstores are devoted to tomes on the CIA and spies. Until Vietnam War protests and Watergate helped expose CIA scandals of the 1970s, the average bookstore carried no books about the agency. When I researched Condor, I found only three credible books on the CIA, two by David Wise and Thomas Ross, The Invisible Government and the Espionage Establishment, and one by Andrew Tully, CIA, The Inside Story. Well, that's weird. I doubt that's the case. I mean, maybe that was the case for him, but I feel like you could have gone into anybody's library, maybe just on the East Coast and found those. Who says fortunately the CIA was treated fictionally, CIA was treated like a ghost, a giant presence everyone tiptoed around but no one touched. Its agents made appearances in hundreds of novels, but they were usually somber creatures of unquestioned monomania and solid competence. What and how and why they did what they did went unexamined. CIA agents were ipso facto on the right side, if not Yale superheroes, certainly dependable Boy Scouts tinged with romanticism. Now we get that a lot. I mean, remember we got that in um, The Good Shepherd plays on that, as does the story of Bill Donovan. I got a Bill Donovan biography up there, which plays on that. I mean that is sort of the superficial level of the romanticism of CIA and espionage. So that's probably pretty accurate. But what was I about to say? I'll think of it in a minute. A notable exception was the 1971 novel that I hadn't read before writing Condor called The Rope Dancer, written by Victor Marchetti, CIA agent, who in post Condor 1974 co-authored The CIA and the Cult of Intelligence. Go see Jay's channel for that one for a breakdown of that at the Globalist book series. The classic expose that a First Amendment loving Supreme Court censored on a word by word basis. In his novel, Marchetti followed a then frequent and today absurd sounding practice. He changed the name of the CIA to the NIA, further distancing fiction from reality. Oh, I know what I was going to say. The way that he just talked about CIA in the early 70s and the fact that they weren't present in bookstores and in movies, think of the early 1970s at the tail end of the 60s. 60s movies were concerned with the adventure of usually like World War II, right? I mean, s- no one, I mean, they didn't even know about SEALs, right? And even SAS wasn't really mentioned. It was just like secret agents and Bond and things like Where Eagles Dare, which is one of my favorite movies. But it was more British intelligence and the Secret Service, right? Well, that is the same thing that's kind of come to light in the past, I don't know, 10 years or so with the way that NSA is now in is now sort of exposed in terms of a mass exposure with fiction and movies. We get this everywhere now. But that wasn't the case at the time, and we're gonna see when we cover Sneakers that Sneakers, as far as I know, is one of the first movies where, like, NSA is blatantly in the movie and talks about. So that's pretty interesting. He mentions Don DeLeo at the bottom of this page. Then he goes on to talk about what his book is about and how it changed for the movie. And one of these, and I found this part pretty ridiculous. He talks about how he says in 1971, Allen Ginsberg is the beat poet. By 1971, as America's rolling toward a narcotics nightmare that none of us back then could imagine, he had seen the best minds of his generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves through America's streets in search of an angry fix. At the beginning of the poem, Howl. The horrors. Remember, Allen Ginsberg coined the term "flower power," and he was present at Timothy Leary's "Human Be-In," but he was also the King of May in the Velvet Revolution in Prague. The horrors of heroin scream too loudly for the man inside the poet to ignore. Cherubic, bald, bearded, yeah, Skittles, mantra chanting Ginsburg, hated by thousands of conservative upholders of law and order and our decent way of life, did what few of his critics would ever dare to do. Ginsburg declared a personal war on heroin, and he backed his rhetoric with action. His crusade was investigatory as well as proselytory. Lee's story concerned Ginsburg's investigations into the CIA's allies in Southeast Asia and their ties to the heroin business. Well, that's ironic because Ginsburg himself had ties to CIA, if not through a secondary function, through Esalen, right? Through Esalen Institute, Human Ecology Fund, taking part personally in the proto MK Ultra LSD, in the acid tests, and being funded through front groups. So it's more complex than he is aware, but he might not be aware of that, um, especially at the time of the writing. A year later, as I weighed my ability to sell a novel about a CIA in which not everyone was red, white, and blue pure, I stumbled across a book by historian Alfred McCoy. Shouts out to Alfred McCoy, who braved the wrath of the U.S. government, French intelligence agencies, the mafia, the Union Corsair, the French major French criminal syndicate, Chinese triads, and our exiled Kuomintang Chinese allies to write politics of heroin in Southeast Asia. The analytical history of the 20th century, whose depth, accuracy, and brilliance deserves the Pulitzer and all the other prizes it never received. McCoy tramped the mountains of Laos, air conditioned government corridors of Saigon, and along the klongs of Bangkok to gather an irrefutable preponderance of evidence that showed how, in the crusade against communism, our government had, in the least, embraced ignorance about the gangsterism of those who called themselves our friends. McCoy's book was the final ray of light I needed to see the path of my novel. Condor took wing. Yes, you really got to read. You got to read The Politics of Heroin by Alfred McCoy. It is so good. It's interesting because it's an analytical history of CIA operations, the Golden Triangle, Air America, and Kun Sa, the opium warlord. And it is so readable. It's fascinating. You will tear through that book. It's a big book, but it's a great book. Um, my protagonist, he says, oh no, hold on. Let me skip back. Most of my revelations about the CIA came from Wise and Ross. The rest came from my assuming that the CIA as a government bureaucracy would function not too differently from other government bureaucracies like HUD. Like HUD. So funny. He compares his knowledge of the CIA to the housing and urban development. And remember the Paul Newman movie? Um, that's crazy. I projected certain this poor guy. I projected certain elements like the existence of a panic line for agents in trouble. Their later days revealed to be true, which is pretty cool. That's one of the coolest elements in the book, which we're going to get to. My protagonist was deliberately not a superhero. He was an any man, any reader, trapped by the paranoia of our times. I chose Condor for his code name because it elegantly implies a witness to death. Now, surely maybe it's by an accident in the landscape of literature and espionage and the zeitgeist that Condor also gives us paperclip and CIA implications with it. I mean, but you can't see how that's an accident. And if it is, then that's pretty wild. But I also disagree with him here about how Malcolm in the book is an everyman. He's not an everyman. I mean, he's CIA and he's also a literary figure. He's working in the so-called literary historical society, which is he's working there because it's a small division as a front group for CIA. That's how he stumbles on this conspiracy. So, I think that's pretty interesting. That ties into what I've mentioned so many times before, which is like don't ask the author what they meant by their work because oftentimes it's misleading, even unintentionally. He says he made the book basically about the book. So this is what I was talking about with Tom Clancy's Without Remorse. Without Remorse is about a SEAL who stumbles on an Air America Golden Triangle heroin trafficking conspiracy because it kills someone he loves, and then he goes to take it down. They changed that to something more, I guess, relevant for the times and something dealing with Russia or whatever, um, for the series on Amazon. But nevertheless, the truth of the story is fascinating because it really is truthful. A lot of it is not factual, but that doesn't matter because it's actually truthful more than factual. Sometimes the factual events can be so disparate and so incongruous and so misleading or almost paradoxical that the truth comes out of that, right? Because that's the whole point of conspiracy. And we're going to see in sneakers that that's one of the things that happens because of the MacGuffin of the black box, which is actually not a MacGuffin in the movie. So that is what 6 Days of the Condor is about. So remember, 3 Days of the Condor, they changed this. So 6 Days of the Condor is about basically a guy who stumbles on a Golden Triangle operation based on heroin trafficking in mid to post Vietnam era globalism. but the movie is about the oil wars and the oil crisis, and this is it doesn't change it for the worse because both things are true. They're just two separate arms of black budgets. He says, let's see, drop the Vietnam prologue and epilogue in favor of immediate story development. Let the woman Condor Dragoons to help him live, and change heroin into something else. Could it be some kind of super drug? Well, that's interesting because he's writing this preface in 1990 talking about some kind of super drug. And that is exactly what's happened now with fentanyl, right? With the French Connection just coming out, there's a feeling that heroin had already been done. I reluctantly agreed to all those edits. Vietnam was excised. The woman was shot in the head, but saved off screen by the miracles of modern medicine, and which is ridiculous in the book. And the bags of heroin smuggled in book crates became morphine bricks. This is what his editor said to him. An intrinsically silly revision. Nobody smuggles morphine bricks. They refine them into heroin. Um, He says, theoretically, I can argue with those three edits lessen the book, but such abstract judgments ignore an important truth of writing. Prose, this is important. Prose consists of two equally decisive forces, an idea and its execution. 18 years later, after the facts, I believe that my ideas were correct and good, but I can't swear that the writing skills of the 24-year-old I was then could execute those ideas well enough to merit their survival. I like how he's so honest about his own writing ability and what has become of his book. I think that's admirable. My note here says speedball, heroin plus cocaine, super drug, and then fentanyl. 1972, morphine bricks changed for the narrative. CF Tom Clancy without remorse. Plot also changed. And then 1990 to 2001 with the oil wars, and then Desert Storm became the war on terror. Condor was created in 1972, published in 1974. This is 1990. The old realities do not lie in ambush for writers anymore, but the same underlying forces are there: greed, fear, heroism, love, hatred, sacrifice, paranoia. This is the end of the preface here. He says, Cold War is gone and no more Vietnams is a perpetual bipartisan political promise. But as I write, the 82nd Airborne and the Marines are dug into the sands of the Middle East because of a love of freedom or because of an oil crisis or maybe because of both. China is inscrutable. And this is before the new Chinese century, so that's pretty interesting. Soviet Union is being reborn or dying, depending on what time it is. Despite obituaries from respected journalists, the mafia is alive and well with its unconvictable Godfather starring on best dressed lists as his corporate enterprise faces challenges from the Yakuza, the Triads, the Ghost Shadows, and cocaine cartels in Medellin and Cali. Um, Hotler is probably dead, but where is Carlos the Jackal? Well, we've done a stream on Carlos the Jackal. Remember we did forget what we did, but go back and look at my Carlos the Jackal stream. We did an analysis of the Hunting the Jackal book, and we've also done an analysis. Well, we didn't do an analysis of I've I've got the book up here somewhere of the book on John Gotti. Maybe we could do that in the future sometime. The biography of John Gotti and the Gambino crime family. Hundreds of thousands of Americans call the streets home, stare with hollow eyes at those of us who can afford to buy a newspaper. A newspaper. What will fill that gaze? He says 50, he says, incredible, true, history's cradle for tomorrow's condors. Excellent introduction. So here's what the book is about. We get this guy, um, what's his name? Malcolm Turner and Robert Redford in the movie. And he is working in a front group in DC, which changes to New York for the movie, which is like the American Literary Society. If you want to see a good example of where these places are, um, I would go to what's that neighborhood in New York? What's the neighborhood? It starts with a G. Oh my God, now I can't think of it. I'll come back to that. But you would go to places like that in Manhattan, and you see exactly the type of buildings that you would see here, or just go to DC, and you see the kind of nondescript buildings that are they're nice looking buildings. They're not nondescript government buildings. They actually look like, they're in not Greenwich Village. Yeah. God, I can't remember it. I used to walk through it every day on my way back from work. Oh my God. I'll think of it in a second. But it's got a little bronze plaque on the front, and it'll say something like, American Literary Society, and there will be a wrought iron fence out front, and you go in, and then there's a larger than normal peephole on the front of the door, and maybe a camera looking down, and it looks nondescript. It's like hiding in plain sight. So that's where the guy works every day, and his job is basically to scour texts like literature of any kind. It's funny because he's kind of doing what we're doing here, but the point is that part of the CIA's their analyst, a small analyst division, which is in the book, is dedicated to simply analyzing every text, looking for relevant things that are or elements in the book that are relevant to active operations or seem to indicate some sort of insight that is unwarranted of active operations or are predictive for the future for predictive models and war games. And he says that they read all of the texts. I mean, they have Don Quixote, they have everything. And he goes through these texts and he writes a literary analysis and he sends it off in a cable. And that's all they do. Now, the reason that this is the center of a conspiracy in the movie, or rather the book, is because what happens is um a death squad or a hit group or a cell. Gramercy Park. Thank you. I knew it started with a G. Thank you so much, Kristen. Yes, Gramercy Park. Go to Gramercy Park. Gramercy Park is where the Poetry Society of America is, and where the like one of the dramatic societies is located. And I used to walk through it all the time on my way back from bartending. And I went to a cocktail party at the Poetry Society of America, but, like, that looks like the perfect front group for some of these things. It's kinda like Embassy Row in DC and some of the buildings there. Tompkins Square Park, definitely not. Maybe, but that's good, Chris, because I lived in the East Village. I lived in Alphabet City, block away from Tompkins Square Park, and so I would go there all the time, and the only building I could think of there that would match that description would be the house where Charlie Parker lived, which is right on Tompkins Square Park, and then St. Mark's Place is right there. But it wouldn't be. I don't think that would be fitting for this because because the people walking around Tompkins Square Park and St. Mark's are not the sort of people that at least look on the surface like they would be working for a CIA front group. I mean, they would be a little bit. It would be a little bit different. It would be like Gramercy Park, but maybe that would be an even more um, subtle place where they would go. I don't know. When I think Tompkins Square Park, I think Sh Jean-Michel Basquiat, slamming slamming that dog food, living in his cardboard box, and then, the bar, Doc Holliday's right there, which is where I used to go all the time, and, it's just not the Life Cafe is right there. It's like, but actually, maybe that's more fitting for now, the Life Cafe. So I told you about when they were filming did I tell you guys about when they were filming Rent there? You know that musical Rent, which I've never seen, but I don't really wanna see it, but, I was walking out of my house one day, and actually, I was walking from there to the library in, like, February, and it was cold, and I turned the corner, I walked down 11th, and then I turned right and then turned right again so I could walk down Tompkins, and, all of a sudden they were filming a movie and I saw my buddy over there. And my buddy is Jesse L. Martin. He was in Law and Order. And we had met at his condo. I went to his condo for Thanksgiving one year because my friend Steven played the young Scrooge in a television version of A Christmas Carol. I think I told you guys this before. But anyway, so he came over from Scotland and stayed with me, and we went to the premiere at the Plaza Hotel, and then Jesse invited us for Thanksgiving dinner at his condo in Tribeca overlooking the Big 9 hole in the ground, and it was the Law& and Order cast. The whole Law& and Order cast was there. It was really cool. It was awesome, a really good time, and, we went to that place Crowbar afterwards. Anyway, so I turned the corner, and Jesse is in the original play Rent, and he plays the same character in the movie. But they were filming the movie, and he was there, and he had that trench coat on and that hat, and he was singing that song 800 what 800 minutes, whatever that song is. But he was there and he was filming the scene, and I stopped and I waited till they cut, and I went, "Hey, Jesse," and he went, "Hey, man," and he invited me over to the set, and I went over and, met the director or whatever, and then his trailer was parked right out front of my apartment. So we walked back and, he was like, "Well, I gotta hang for a little while in my trailer, before the next scene." I was like, "Come on up." So he came up to my apartment and we took shots of Bushmills for like 2 hours, and, uh, and then he went back and then they filmed his scene. So that was cool. Anyway, I don't know why I told that story. Oh, because you said Tompkins Square Park. Um So anyway, so what happens is, Malcolm is, working at this place, and then all of a sudden he goes out for lunch, and when he comes back in, everyone in his division has been gunned down, and he's confused by the situation, but he goes and he has enough tradecraft to, like, look for the weapons that are stocked there, and, in the place, like, the secretary is this old lady, this Laverne lady or whatever, and she's sitting there, and she's like, "Come on in." She lets the mailman in, and the mailman is the main gunman. He of course, and he's got a, submachine gun. He guns down everybody, and they rifle through the place, and then they plant shells and some sort of letter as a red herring to throw off whoever's going to investigate this, and they make it look like it was the Czech government. But Malcolm knows that that's not the case, and anyway, he leaves, and and what happens? He goes out to a phone booth, and he calls his direct emergency line. So, there's one thing that he talks about in the novel that turned out to be true to life, which is that every CIA guy has a personal code. Of course, his code name is Condor, but he's got a personal code name, and he's got a personal, um, number, and he calls the phone line, and there's a guy who answers. The guy who answers, who mans the phones, is a former agent who was doing like sabotage in the Middle East and got his legs blown off. And now he's like kind of got this honorary position. He's still paid to man the phones for the emergency agents. So he gets the call and he tells him, "Get out of there, get out of town. You've been compromised and we don't know what's happened." And then he calls the number, and then that gets all the way up to the director. The director tells the guy who um, he's like the chief of staff at Langley, and he locks it down, and then they issue orders that say that in the lockdown, nobody can leave Langley, nobody can leave the base, nobody can leave any of the buildings, and if they try to leave, then they're to be shot on sight. And it says this guy has, like, awesome power. He's got a tremendous power, and, and then then they send a guy out to investigate, and then they find all the stuff, what happens at the scene of the crime. Malcolm's pieced out and he's gone, and he actually sees a girl that he knows, and it's weird because he kidnaps the girl. But then when they get back to her flat, they end up sexing, and it's really weird in the book. It's like awkward because what he was saying in his introduction that he didn't know how to write sex scenes, and like I don't know why he's doing that in the I guess because he's trying to add like a James Bond element where this guy's like slightly dashing or whatever, but it's weird. But anyway, they investigate, and then it turns out that one of the guys investigating is in on the conspiracy. So I'm trying to make this long story short. So what happens is they push that up the line, and then, the guy who's in this cell, he finds out where Malcolm is staying. He goes, he sends the same mailman to kill him. The mailman comes in, and Malcolm lets him. It's really weird. Malcolm lets him in. He's like, "Oh," and the guy's like, "Oh, I'm here for a package for Linda or whatever." And he's like, "She's not here." Why would he answer the door in the first place? If you're hiding because a death squad took out your whole division and you're staying at some random chick's house, why would you answer the door or make any noise while she's gone out for supplies? Right? That's weird. So anyway, he lets him in, and the guy, like, while Malcolm goes around the corner to get like a pen or something, he hears the click on the guy's machine gun. And he comes back around and he throws a hot pot of coffee in his face. They end up fighting. The girl comes in, and then Malcolm ends up killing the death squad guy. Well, So then what happens is he goes on the run. He goes to the other guy who wasn't in the office that day, who's this guy Heidegger. And he finds 10 grand in cash in his closet, which has been planted because he's been murdered. He was taken out by the death squad before they went and took out the division where he works. So he's trying to figure out what is this. He calls the emergency line again, and the guy tells him, "Look, CIA's been infiltrated, it's been compromised, and the people investigating are we don't know who's in on this, but you need to stay under the radar." So so what ends up happening is Malcolm takes out another guy, and then he is contacted by this guy who is the head of the death squad. He's an assassin who planned the whole thing. And and he's like, "Why are you letting me live?" And the guy says, "Well, here's the story. The reason why I ordered this hit is because years ago in Vietnam, I was there with sort of with CIA, but well, I'll get to that part in a second. So he's working there with CIA, and he is in charge of shipping heroin to the United States. So he's part of this, Air America Lansdale operation that's going on in the Golden Triangle. And the only other people that know about it, one of the people that knows about it is um the he's like a general or whatever. He's like over top of them all. And when that guy found out that their information had been leaked secretly through Malcolm's division in a book, because what they were doing is they were using the crates where they ship books back to the group to cover for the opium that they were shipping. So in other words, it's kind of like this is before American Gangster and that whole story, and about shipping before the revelations about shipping heroin in the United States in coffins. In this book, they're about shipping it in book crates. So they're just trafficking opium. And that they worried that that was gonna be discovered and it was gonna compromise their whole operation, so the guy at CIA ordered the division to be eliminated, including Malcolm, who was working there. Now, Malcolm never stumbled upon the conspiracy himself, but he's discovered it, by the way, through this guy, and he says, "Why aren't you gonna kill me?" And the guy says, "Well, I'm not gonna kill you because you represent my only other lifeline um, to living. In other words, if I eliminate you, then nobody else will be there to prove that this other guy's the head of the thing and he's going to try to frame me." And he says, "By the way, I'm sorry about your girlfriend because along the way, Malcolm's girlfriend also gets eliminated. She gets shot at the base of her skull, but somehow lives, which is stupid. That's another like hole in the plot. But whatever. So so he says, "Malcolm, here's where the general is. You can go eliminate him, but I can't because he'll know I'm coming. And so, here's what you do. And I'm going to peace out. I'm going to go to the Middle East where I have employers who like my special set of skills." So, so he says, "Go up to my car, and you'll find the directions to this guy's house in Chevy Chase." Chevy Chase is a suburb in Maryland. It's a, well-to-do suburb for politicos and intelligence. And the guy lives on a massive estate, and also there's a machine gun in the back, and there's directions for how to kill the guy. So Malcolm goes, and now remember, he was the so-called everyman, which is interesting also because I assume anybody in CIA would have been trained at the farm, so they know tradecraft and they know how to fire a weapon. One of the details that's lost in the book is he says he had never fired a gun before, which is weird because he's in CIA. He would have been at the farm. Of course, he's fired a gun. Basic, basic. So whatever, and he's not an asset, I mean, he works for them. He's an analyst, but so he becomes the sort of pre, Harrison Ford, Tom Clancy character who is just an analyst. "Well, give me back my family. Give me back my family." He's just an analyst, but he goes and handles a machine gun, and he goes to Chevy Chase, climbs up the wall, gets into the guy's room, um, and shoots him through the legs. But then the assassin shows up, murders the guy, and then later Malcolm shows up at the airport and he takes out the guy in front of everyone, and then he lives. So it's really weird. It's a kind of there are a few plot holes, but some of the things that are interesting in this are the fact um, that we see this kind of banal job which is like nothing, also mixed in with literary analysis, which speaks to the East Coast sort of preppy and Yale roots of CIA and how he gets mixed up in a global conspiracy. And the main revelatory thing about the book is that the violence that happens in America in the story and has global implications is a solution caused by a fuck up by the CIA. In other words, they're mopping up their own mess, if that makes sense. So some other things that were interesting in the book, he mentions Don Quixote. He also mentions Catcher in the Rye and Camus. He was reading Catcher in the Rye and Camus, and this is obviously before. This is before the book. The book was published before the Church Committee hearings, before the MK Ultra revelations, and way before. So 5 years, 6 years before Mark David Chapman and Jonathan Lennon. He also analyzes Plato, which I thought was interesting and sort of foreshadowing because he talks about Plato's forms versus reality and the cave. So in other words, he is sort of living in a meta cave, and that is the meta cave in the cult of intelligence or the wilderness of mirrors. Once he steps outside, he sees that it's just another version of what he saw inside the cave, but it's everything is sort of comes to light and is revealed for him. He has bigger characters to deal with. Um, One other thing was when they talk about murder and elimination, he says the CIA director or one of the guys at CIA directs his elimination squad. He says Mitchell paused both to emphasize his meaning and to hope he wasn't making a mistake. He had just authorized Newberry's team to do anything, including premeditated, non-defensive kills, stateside action without prior clearance, murder by whim. That's I think that if anything is revelatory in this book and is interesting for talking about this sort of espionage world, it's that phrase, murder by whim, right? In other words, they're not subject to laws and any, non-defensive kills are authorized. He says, the consequences of such a rare order could be very grave for all concerned because of course it can blow back on them because that's what the whole book's about. One of the other things here that came to light is page 66 and 67. He talks about supervision of America's large and sometimes cumbersome intelligence community has classically posed the problem of sed quis custodiet ipsos custodes, who guards the guardians. In addition to the internal checks existing independently in each agency, the National Security Agency of 1947 created the National Security Council, a group whose composition varies with each change of presidential administration. The council always includes the president and vice president and usually includes major cabinet members. The council's basic duty is to oversee the activities of the intelligence agencies and to make policy decisions guiding those activities. This is pretty interesting here. Hold on, let me see if I don't know if I'm gonna be able to pull it up. Yeah, I'm not gonna be able to pull it up. But there's a thing called the Council of 40, and I'm not gonna be able to pull it up. But the Council of 40, you can find the declassified documents on this on the Council of 40 and the 5412 group, and this is essentially a group of uh, elites within the elite that is real. And they are at the sort of top of the intelligence pyramid. You remember the SIS, um, uh, Secret Intelligence Service pyramid with the eye in the middle, for Bond, and that is the same in this sort of organization. And the Council of 40 is supposed to be in charge of governing their own. In other words, they are guarding the guardians, like you just said. But in reality, oh, they also started a small security division, but that division is essentially what we see in this group. Um, they end up mopping up their own stuff, and it was revealed that some of the this was like in the late 70s. Some of the members of the Council of 40 were people like Colby. I think the head of it at the time was Kissinger. Now, uh, all of the intelligence divisions report to the NSC director, but we know that this goes up the chain, and they all have, essentially they're also reporting to banks and all the big groups. But but he says here that so it's a symbiotic, specter or octopus system of where everyone's interconnected with everyone else. But there is a Council of 40. They're not called that anymore. The members of the National Security Council are very busy men with demanding duties besides overseeing a huge intelligence network. Council members, by and large, do not have the time to devote to intelligence matters, so most decisions about the intelligence community are made by a smaller council subcommittee known as the Special Group. Insiders often refer to the Special Group as the 5412 Group, so called because it was created by Secret Order 5412 early in the Eisenhower years. The 5412 Group is virtually unknown outside the intelligence community, and even there, only a handful of men are aware of its existence. This says composition of the 5412 group also varies with each administration. Its membership generally includes the director of the CIA, the undersecretary of state of political affairs or his deputy, and the secretary of state, secretary and deputy secretary of defense. In the Kennedy and early Johnson administration, the presidential representative and key man on the 5412 group was McGeorge Bundy. The other members were McGeorge Bundy was also Skull and Bones. The other members were McCone, McNamara, Roswell, Gilpatrick, and U. Alexis Johnson. Overseeing the American intelligence community poses problems for even a small full-time group of professionals, and they started a small security division. There's problem of fragmented authority. Shortly after it was formed, the 5412 group tried to solve the problems of internal information and fragmented authority. The 5412 group established a small special security section with no identity save that of staff of the 5412 group. The special section's duties included liaison work. The head of the special section serves on a board composed of leading staff members from all intelligence agencies. He has the power to arbitrate jurisdictional disputes. The special section also has the responsibility of independently evaluating all the information given to the 5412 group by the intelligence community. But most important, the special section is given the power to perform such necessary security functions as extraordinary circumstances might dictate, subject to group regulation. Um, it's also created a potential problem, and that is their own problems, which they got to mop up. Um, also, the last thing I'll mention about this book is that it's interesting that they mentioned that this guy whose name is Marinick. Marinick is the guy played by Max von Sydow in the movie, and he is an intelligence. He is part of the intelligence community. He's part of the IC, but he's an assassin. He's part of, I guess, um, paramilitary operations and special activities directorate. And what it says is that guys like him, of course, and this is so revelatory. We all know this, but other people still in general don't know this. But I know you guys all know this. But that people like this guy don't have national loyalties. They don't. They're not. They're not the good guys working for America, right? In fact, it says this guy in the early '60s he surfaced working for the French, mainly in Algeria, but he was also taking care of interests in Southeast Asia. Starting in 1963, he came to the attention of those in our business. At various times, he worked for Britain, Communist China, Italy, South Africa, the Congo, Canada, and even did 2 stints for the agency. He also did a type of consulting service for the IRA and the OAS against his former French employers. He always gave satisfaction, and there were no reports of any failures. He was very expensive. Rumor has it he was looking for a big score. In 1964, Marinick was employed by the Generalissimo of Taiwan, Chiang Kai-shek. That's a great book, by the way, on Chiang Kai-shek if you're interested in the Kuomintang. Um, the division, world what came out of World War II and the divisions between Mao and Chiang Kai-shek, and then the Kuomintang going to Taiwan, forming nationalist China, and then being funded by Big Ear Do and the Green Gang out of Shanghai, who were trafficking opium before the advent or the appearance of Kun Sa, the warlord on the scene in the mountain, and his Montagnard army in Southeast Asia, which was responsible for the Golden Triangle. This guy was working for them. One thing I found interesting about this was that, he describes this guy in the book as working for OAS, which is a French fascist, neo-fascist group. The French Foreign Legion was involved with them because they were part of the coup against de Gaulle. The OAS was the group that operated and funded that, and they used the French Foreign Legion as paratroopers to try to invade Paris and form the coup and capture and kill de Gaulle. The reason they did that was because de Gaulle had sold them out with Algeria. Remember, he was giving independence to Algeria, and the Pied Noirs in Algeria, along with French Foreign Legion and OAS, felt that this was a betrayal. So they tried to eliminate him. Now, de Gaulle also was anti-NATO, which is interesting. So I think that it's more complex than just it's not just right and left. Of course, it never is. But my main point when talking about this guy is that the villain in this is a guy who, again, he's not a villain working for some foreign government. He's not working for any government really, but he's tied in with CIA and their own operations. I thought it was interesting that he talks about he worked for OAS and IRA. I mean, um, of course, IRA was. We've talked about this in streams. I did a whole stream on this. Both IRA and loyalist paramilitary groups were sort of controlled by British intelligence simultaneously. We talked about Frank Kitson and low intensity operations. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting. And that again is going to play into what Tom Clancy later is going to use in Patriot games. Um, there's some weird things in this book like that they didn't do in the movie, which was good. For instance, like after the girl that he's been sleeping with that he used to get away gets killed, but she's actually not dead. He has to lay low. So he finds this sex worker in DC, and he goes off and he stays with her for the night. And now that kind of makes sense because you remember that it's kind of like the mob. The mob and the sex worker community are often used by intelligence because there's sort of a built-in omerta, right? Um, in the business of keeping secrets. But the thing that was weird was that he goes and he sexes this biznatch, and and then like the next morning when he wakes up, he goes and he finds like her works and her her drugs in her bathroom, and he's about to stiff her. He's about to not pay her the other half of the money that he had promised. It's like because he says he knows where the money's gonna go. It's like, dude, you just stole 10 grand from your dead friend slash coworker after working for CIA and then killing 3 guys in, that were out to kill you in a death squad because you're working for the same group, and you're with the girl and you made the agreement, so you're not gonna pay her. I thought that was weird. That was like a weird detail to put into the book. But anyway, he does pay her, so he's like, whatever. Um, and anyway, in the end, he, tracks down the guy at the airport and he gets killed. So that is, and Malcolm Turner, the guy who is what's his name? Lives Robert Redford lives at the end of the book, and it's all happily ever after. Now, it's a short book. You can read it in like 2 hours. So, let's move on to the movies. Let's move on to the fun part. Not that this hasn't been fun. Let's move on to the fun part. Oh, yeah, Crispy. Who hasn't stayed a night with a hooker in DC? I mean, I guess people in the IC do that all the time, right? I don't know. I don't know. DC is nasty, man. It's a nasty place. I mean, it's interesting. The other thing that I think about DC is that it's obviously intentionally designed to be a neo Rome because the Pax Romana, the Pax Britannica, the Pax Americana, and all of the trappings of empire are built into DC. I know that's a hot take. I mean, but it's supposed to be like that. Right, but you walking around DC downtown in the midst of these gigantic colonnaded neoclassical buildings and the what did Don DeLeo call it? The cathedral of intelligence is the same as walking around parts of London or walking around Rome. So Shouts out to El Delta who says just finished the Dragon stream. Thank you so much for watching that. Yeah, you guys go back and watch that Dragon stream that I just did. Um, so now we're gonna go on to uh I'll talk briefly about 3 Days of the Condor. Um, because we've just covered it with the book. And then I'll talk about sneakers and spy game. So please make sure you like and share the stream. You can support me with the super chats and PayPal, Cash App, Venmo. I would really, really appreciate your I appreciate your support always, of course. And I'll read the super chats when they come in as I see them, if I see them, and if not at the end. So 3 Days of the Condor is a great film because and this deserves its own analysis, a longer analysis, like a DPH style analysis. Maybe we could do. Shouts out to our friend David Patrick, who just got back from his adventures in Germany, and we're so happy to see him again. So, 3 Days of the Condor is a um, what 1976 film, I think. Is that the same year? Same year as Network that we just did with Jay, and it's directed by Sidney Pollack, and that's interesting because Sidney Pollack is one of those directors who is great at doing intelligence, films about intelligence, but also remember played Ziegler in, Eyes Wide Shut, and it stars Robert Redford and Faye Dunaway. Faye Dunaway was in Network also, and it's also got Max von Sydow, who's in, like, a billion movies. He's great, and the other bad guy is the guy who plays Uncle Ben in the first Spider-Man. So what happens in that is it's different because, uh, Robert Redford as a free Brad Pitt, East Coast literati figure, is working in this office and all of the same events happen, but they change it to the plot of the story revolves around oil rights. So essentially, what happens is that somebody has put into a book and run through his office the revealed plans that threaten to scuttle negotiations for oil rights in the Middle East. And this is interesting because, uh, of course, the oil crisis happened in the 70s, but this is way before the oil wars of, the 1990s and the war on terror. But the people running it, of course, are the IC, and they discover that they've been compromised. So they go and they eliminate their group. Um, some other things that are revelatory about the film are that it was it's the only film to be made inside the World Trade Center. Um, and the other thing that is interesting about the film is that at the end of it, the way that Robert Redford he gets away is not by killing the guy and doing what he does in the book that we just covered. The only variation is that he does that thing that we've talked about so many times and that is such a trope in intelligence movies, which is I'm gonna tell the secrets to the New York Times. You're gonna wait till you show up in Newsweek, right? Which is so ridiculous. Now, why do they do that? They do that because it's a limited hangout that they're showing us in the book, right? Which is that you constantly throughout the book, they talk about feeding just as much information as will be necessary for certain powers like the police, right? The Leos, or for the public at large to get an understanding of what happened, but not to understand the full story. And to understand the full story would be to wreck the very thing, right? Not like they're capable, like the public is capable of wrecking any of this stuff, but it would discredit them. And the best example of this is what happens in the book when the character Max von Sydow's character is described at the end. So what happens is uh, when Malcolm shows up at the airport to ambush. Remember, he talked about the craft of writing. Ambushes the reader. Well, when he shows up to ambush the bad guy at the airport, big not pre Big Nine, right? We get Big Nine things. Um, he sees that Max von Sydow's character is walking with a limp and has a fake mustache, so he's wearing a disguise. But the thing about the limp was really interesting. This might be revelatory to you guys. So he says that spies will often walk. One disguise that they use, which is very simple, is the limp. because what happens with a limp is when someone is walking with a limp, your eyes automatically go to the limp itself or the fact that they have a limp. So the mind concentrates on the abnormality and it diverts attention away from the person's face. So you don't remember their identity or their physical description except for the limp, which is brilliant. He says that it's the same thing that a uniform accomplishes. So when a person is when they want to hide, um, you would think that they wouldn't wanna stand out, and of course, most, the gray man and the CIA and, they're nondescript people usually, they're not the MK Delta characters that you see with Bond, they're usually, nondescript people wearing nondescript suits. So that's the gray man, they can fit in anywhere, right? That's the whole point. But the other side of that, the exact opposite is also true, which is that when a person comes in wearing a uniform, the general us the general sheeple out there, "Come on, sheeple." General sheeple will not remember the physical description of the person's face because their eye is attracted only to the dazzle of the uniform itself. So they remember the person was in uniform, they could probably remember all the details of the uniform, but not the person's face, which I thought was fascinating. It's a fascinating sort of hypnotic mental trick that they do. Um, so So what happens? Oh, so he at the end of the movie, he goes up to Uncle Ben and he says, basically, you're gonna let me live and you're gonna get away with it because if you don't, I've got a dead man switch, which is the contact I have at Newsweek, at CIA Newsweek, and they're gonna publish this whole thing. They're gonna blow this story wide apart. And and Uncle Ben says, the last line of the movie is, "Are you sure?" Which is pretty good because he's saying basically, "Are you so sure they're gonna publish it?" In other words, "We got Mockingbird too. All those people are also us. How do you know they're gonna publish it?" And now that's interesting because that ties into our next movie, which is Spy Game. So again, Spy Game came out in, 2001, November 2001. It's a Tony Scott film. Great Tony Scott. And it has all the same aesthetic as you see in all the yeah, Real John Connor says, "I thought the gray man was the, werewolf of Listeria," right? Very bad description. That guy was a real jerk. Um, that's from our homeboy out there, Norm, my hero Norm, RIP. But, Tony Scott, this film has the same sort of aesthetic as the movie Deja Vu, another great movie, which also involves, Department of I don't think it's NSA, but it's Department of Energy. And, and so what happens is that Robert Redford is asleep in his, apartment, and one thing that was weird in this was he gets a call from David Hemmings. "David Hemmings, and yes, the Emperor Caesar, the great Gaul of Rome." David Hemmings. Remember David Hemmings' last film was Gladiator? The Gaul Maximus will fight the Gaul of Rome. David Hemmings in the movie Gladiator. David Hemmings is working for he's working at the consulate in Hong Kong, and he's the guy with the big eyebrows. He was in that movie, about the photographer. What was it? Not Celebrity, but, what's the David Hemmings movie about the photographer with the red cover? Somebody in chat will know. And he calls Robert Redford and he says, "We've got a problem here. Boy Scouts in trouble." Boy Scout is the code name of Brad Pitt. He says, "Where are you? You need to get to Langley." So Robert Redford gets out of bed and he gets in his old Porsche, which he, by the way, drives again in the movie, Sneakers. He always is driving this old Porsche. Robert Redford is always driving an old Porsche, wearing a pea coat, or, wearing a varsity jacket. Have you noticed that? Like in every movie. It's weird. He wears the same varsity jacket in Sneakers that he wears in The Natural. So, Spartacus. Um, so so he tells him, "Get on over to Langley." So Robert Redford gets in his old Porsche, and it's weird because he's driving through, like, he's obviously driving through London. Like, the street signs are all English. They're all British. And yes, I mean the movie Tennis Shoes. And but somehow he drives in his Porsche for speeds through the English city streets straight all over the ocean into Langley, which is weird. And he drives up to the station at Langley. He gives a little, hello. And the movie was obviously filmed before the Big Nine because post Big Nine, he wouldn't be just driving through. Or maybe he would. I don't know. But he drives into Langley, and it turns out that it's his last day. So, of course, this is like the lethal weapon trope of, I ain't got to go through this shit on my last day. But it's Robert Redford on his last day at Langley. And he gets called into a meeting with a bunch of stiffs who are, everybody's out to get each other. They're all looking around the room. So, what did you mean by that operation? And he's told that, do you know anything about this guy, Boy Scout? Well, then we get a flashback. So, Robert Redford tells his story. Yeah, I first met Boy Scout in Nam. So, we see the flashback. Robert Redford is a young intelligence officer, and he is flying into Nam, and we get John Fogerty booming, and he says, "I was looking for this guy Bing Ha or whatever, who was a an NVA um contracted assassin, so that we could kill this general or whatever, right?" And it was part of the Phoenix program. So again, we get a hint of Doug Valentine's Phoenix program here because we're using um snipers and assassins to kill um North Vietnamese officials. Remember, we get that in that's part of the plot of Apocalypse Now because he assassinated a government tax collector. Seems they didn't dig what he had to tell them, right? Doing what needs to be done and doing it. So that's Phoenix program. I'm not saying that in a good way, obviously, because like look at the John Stockwell interviews and Doug Valentine and Lansdale, and yes, they were they were using seals to pick people off of trails, puncture them in the neck, and then write pentagrams above their blooded out corpse saying that the vampires were going to get them, and then busting into houses, yelling trick or treat, and murdering families, and then doing the the Klaus Barbie Mengele operations of absolute trauma bonding and terror. That's the real hearts and minds. Right? Hearts and minds is not we're dropping leaflets on the Vietnamese telling them to go to Exxon and McDee's. Hearts and minds is they want to shatter the will and the psyche of an entire population and eliminate 2 million people and break them as part of war game simulations to run the military and the intelligence so that they can bring it back home eventually, right? So, zap them with your siren, man. Zap them with your siren. I'm an American. Oh, you got cigarettes. Oh, don't mind the heads, man. So Bing Ha or whatever has been eliminated. So instead, they have Brad Pitt, who's chilling over there in the other group because that group has gone indigenous and native, and they don't hang out with the other Americans. This guy's part of MACV-SOG, and Brad Pitt just happens to be one of those guys. He's a Carlos Hathcock Kentucky farm boy who is great at sniping. So he says basically, here's what you're going to do. And he proves to be successful. He kills the guy and then he takes down a helicopter when their spot is located. Then he recruits him into actual CIA ops and teaches him spycraft. So Spy Game is great because it talks about the great game, right? The movie is showing us spycraft and the great game like on a basic level. And that's what's pretty cool about it. And it's all the little tricks and trades of the craft. And eventually, Brad Pitt gets a conscience, and when he has to ditch a defector whom he's taking from East Germany to West Germany across the line, he meets a girl who's played by Catherine McCormack, who was in remember she was in Braveheart, um, and she went to Oxford School of Drama, and so Catherine McCormack is working for a group who is let's say, disseminating stabbies amongst the native population in like Lebanon. And um, Robert Redford tells him like basically this girl is not who you think she is. I guarantee you, if you are the guy working for us, and you meet her and she's in this situation in Beirut, she's also working for somebody. And he's like, no, she's not. Well, it turns out she is, right? Because she's in Beirut and she's like working for some NGO and she's doing all this. And then it turns out that she gets somehow the same thing happens in China and she gets kidnapped by the Chinese. So by the Chi-Coms. So Brad Pitt has to go in and he has to rescue her, and he does that by going undercover as an NGO and giving stabbies. He's giving out stabbies for a cholera outbreak at the prison at a Chi-Com prison. He fakes his own death through an electrical outlet, like he gets electrocuted. He takes a heart slowing medicine. He wakes up, um, and he's going to take out the electrical system there, and then he's going to find her. But he gets found. So then it's Bishop's job. No, he plays Bishop which is interesting because Brad Pitt's character is Bishop, and Robert Redford's character is Nathan Muir. And in Sneakers, Robert Redford's character is named Bishop. So what ends up happening is Bishop, I'm sorry, Robert Redford has to find a way of rescuing Brad Pitt because he told him a long time ago, if you go off with this girl, I can't protect you. You're gone out in the cold. You're a spy out in the cold, and there's nothing we can do for you. Well, at this point, he makes good on his earlier relationship with him, and he diverts he diverts his savings through his bank in Hong Kong. He tries to publish a story through, like, The Guardian in Hong Kong, but the CIA gets wind of it first because the guy's a Mockingbird asset, and they squash the story. Make sense? Well, um, he then goes further and he says, "Take the $250,000," and he uses that to bribe a Chi-Com general, and then um they take out the electrical grid by misappropriating satellite photos and electrical information, and they take out the electrical grid on it looks like Hong Kong. It looks like all of Hong Kong Island. But I don't know where it is in China. I assume it's Hong Kong, but I guess it's mainland China. I mean, this was post handover. What was the handover? 1998. So it's post handover. But, and then he sends 2 SEAL teams in, they infiltrate the prison, they rescue Brad Pitt, they take him away, uh, and then Robert Redford drives off, and everybody lives happily ever after. Now that's cool, but the movie is interesting because, number 1, it was made with, the villain in the book, sort of a nebulous villain, being the Chi-Coms, but we see that actually the Chi-Coms and the IC are working together through back channels, but the back channels actually become just the normal channels of communication and intelligence. So again, it's this global symbiotic system. They use SEALs, they use satellite photos, they use NSA, they use CIA, all to work with NGOs and to rescue this girl. And it's about a love story because it's a movie. But it's interesting because the movie, if you remember, or if you were alive at the time, you remember that it was kind of strange to have the villain be the Chinese government because we've always had the Russian government be the villain in the movies and all that, and it's coming back to that now. But this was at the beginning of the Chinese New Century, and I just remember this being so relevant because again, I got the DVD when I was living in Malaysia, and Malaysia is interesting because it's kind of divided into thirds, and I'm just saying this from, anecdotally. All of the labor in Malaysia is done by Malays who are Muslim. The management is done by Indians who are Hindu, and then the corporate and the money is run by the Chinese. So, it's a society divided, like, sort of equilaterally amongst 3 disparate groups. right above Singapore. Um, so who is worse, Chicoms or CIA? That's, I mean, this shows that it's all sort of tied in together. And I mean, think of 1984, right? Where we have we have a forever war with, um, East Asia, and the war changes amongst three groups. It's always going on one place or the middle place or the third place. And the first and the third are always at war, the first and the second, or the second and the third. And it's sort of a forever war. But in reality, the movie shows us that the systems all sort of they all work in a big globalist network. Now, that's not to say, in terms of specifics, obviously there are differences, and yes, and there are national differences and all that, and national interests. But in terms of what we covered in network, right? There are no Russians, there are no Chinese, there are no Americans. This is a corporate cosmology. It's a corporate intelligence, big defense, big FARMA, big opium, big food network, which all works symbiotically like a big specter octopus under this pyramid, right? My homeboy Mick says Virginia's for lovers. BLA is Mr. Lover Lover. VA is for hustlers. It's for lovers too, but yeah. Thank you, my friend. So the movie's interesting because again of the big nine elements. um, the pre big Chinese century elements, and the way that we see spycraft work out. And so well, that brings us to our final movie. I know I kind of given a cursory analysis of that movie, but I think that all that's kind of set in 6 Days of the Condor, which just kind of works through all three of these movies. Now, the final movie is the movie Sneakers. Now, this is a great movie. Again, this is 1992, and it's an ensemble cast. Robert Redford is obviously the lead, but it's truly an ensemble. Robert Redford plays Bishop again, so there's a Bishop character, and he's my sort of theory is that with these, not really a theory, but my take on these three movies is that Robert Redford is essentially playing the same CIA character through all three of these. And what's really fascinating is that, you know, as far as Robert Redford being a Greenpeace guy and all that stuff, and a dialectical lefty and all that stuff, it's like it's interesting how he's constantly making CIA movies. So the movies are supposed to be critical of the IC, but actually they just end up um, socially engineering and planning, uh, wh- what the public thinks about that very group. And actually, the term social engineering is important for the movie Sneakers because that is it's a term that NSA and hackers use within the film. So so what happens in the film is we see at the beginning we get these characters. They are We get Robert Redford as a young man in a like a in a again in a varsity jacket in black and white inside the Back to the Future City Hall, which is it's the same building. That's where it's set, and he's in there with this guy, and they are hacking rudimentary computers and banking systems to divert funds from. At the end of the movie, it becomes they divert funds from the RNC and they send him off to like Greenpeace. But they're diverting funds and they're gonna shock the system, man. The man power to the people, he says. So all of a sudden, Robert Redford says, like, look, man, I'm gonna go out and get something to eat. Now that's interesting because he does the same thing in 3 days of the Condor. He in 3 days of the Condor, he avoids his elimination by going out to get something to eat, right? And when he comes back, everyone's dead. Well, in this, he goes out into a snowstorm to get something to eat. When he comes back, the FEDS have swarmed on the thing and they've arrested his friend. So his friend goes down for the crimes, right? The hacking crimes or the financial crimes, and Redford gets away. So then we see him waking up, just like he did in Spy Game. It's always Robert Redford waking up looking disheveled in an apartment. That's like it's in every movie. And um, don't forget to like and share, guys. Please smash that like. And please don't forget the super chat links and support me any way you can. Thank you. So so he wakes up and he goes to this bank and we learned that basically he's a white hat hacker. So he's been hired by the bank to infiltrate their system to test the security abilities of the bank. And he we don't learn this till after the operation, but he goes in and he does something. He withdraws $100,000. He walks out, and then he goes straight up to the boardroom where the bankers are sitting there, and he says, "Well, you got major, faults in your system. Where's my check?" And then they cut him his check. And then we're introduced to his gang, his squad, his gang. And it's a pretty cool gang. It's like a motley crew of characters, including 33rd degree Dan Aykroyd, who is cool in this movie. What's funny about this movie is that Dan Aykroyd was like 40 years old in the movie, so he's younger than I am now. And I always think of Dan Aykroyd as like old, but the way he talks, like again, the way his character in this talks, we would get along with him if we lived in this movie. Because like there's a scene where they're having a party like at their warehouse where they're based or whatever. And and they're all dancing with the one lady and who is like Mary Steenburgen's beta. She's like Walmart Mary Steenburgen. And, then when they show Dan Aykroyd, he's, like, eating his shrimp or whatever, and he's like, "So, yeah, this is the same sound system that they used to fake the moon landing," and, and he's constantly driving Sidney Poitier crazy because Sidney Poitier in the movie is, again, an ex-CIA guy, uh, who is working with this group, so he's, like, the sort of point man. Well, Robert Redford's the point man, Sidney Poitier is, like, the overseer. River Phoenix is a 19-year-old Ferris Bueller hacker who hacked into his school system to change his grades and got caught, and now is great at computer systems. And there's also David Strathern. What's his name? David Strathern, who was a great character actor. He got nominated for an Oscar for that movie, Good Night and Good Luck, which is another intelligence tied movie. But he plays this guy Whisper, and this is the coolest character in the movie because he's blind, but he has perfect pitch, and that ties into there's a scene in the movie where I'll get to the plot rundown in a second, but there's a scene in the movie where, they have to, find a way into this guy's office, and so they get the guy next to him who works at this corporation, and that is the guy from Groundhog Day, and when they go through his trash, Dan Aykroyd comes in with all the trash. Standard operating procedure. He comes in with all the trash, and they find a box of Captain Crunch, which is prominently placed in the movie. Now, yes, that's product placement, but that's also a nod to that guy, that hacker. He was a boomer hacker. His name's in his nickname or whatever is Captain Crunch, and that guy is called that because he knew a kid like River Phoenix in the movie who had perfect pitch, and this is real, and realized that, um, a toy that they gave out, I guess I think it was like 1957 or something, but a toy that they gave out in Captain Crunch which was a whistle, what had, I forget the hertz, but it's, it matches perfectly the tone used by the phone corporation, and so that allowed him to hack the phone system. Which is like the beginning of hacking. And that's this thing called phone phreaking. Have you guys ever heard of that? Kind of a it's they ended up getting the term phishing from that and from the band Fish, right? Right? You guys, I remember seeing Fish 98, Yem, You Enjoy Myself, followed by David Bowie, 1998, Virginia Beach. They played Terrapin Station, bro. They played Terrapin Station, man. It was on the anniversary of Jerry's death, and Fish is playing Terrapin Station. Man, there's fucking pyramids in the background. There's airplanes crisscrossing overhead. There's fireworks. We're at Virginia Beach. Fucking unbelievable, bro. Right, so that's where phone freaking comes from. But anyway, that's a nod to that. So anyway, what happens is um they hack the bank or whatever, and then they go back, and then, 2 gentlemen come in, and they are new clients, and they say, "Come on in, let's go to your board, into your conference room and talk. We want you to look for this black box. We need you to surveil this mathematician, this Julian Assange looking mathematician who's actually played by Donald Logue. Remember Donald Logue was Jimmy the cab driver on MTV? You guys seen this? Right. Jimmy the cab driver, MTV, like late 90s. They call them the Beastie Boys. They call them the Beastie Boys. That guy was cool. But anyway, this is his first movie, and he looks like Julian Assange. He's all in white. He's a mathematician, and they have to surveil him. And they introduce themselves. He says, Robert Redford says, I don't work with the government. And they say, well, we'll pay you handsomely or whatever. And he says, what are you guys, FBI? They say, no. He says, you CIA? No. And then they say, we're NSA. I don't remember a movie before this having NSA. I mean, the conversation with Gene Hackman, Francis Ford Coppola, that's NSA. Um, so I guess that's maybe the first one that I can think of. But if you can think of a movie that has him before this, let me know in the comments. But they introduced themselves with their badge as NSA, and he takes them at their word. He saw the badge. Why wouldn't you believe him? So they got to go surveil Julian Assange, right? By the way, a good movie about Assange is The Fifth Estate. Have you guys ever seen that movie? Is it called The Fifth Estate? Yeah, I think it's The Fifth Estate, which is not often seen movie. Like people don't really know about that movie, but it's really well done. Benedict Cucumber Patch plays Julian Assange, and I've come to kind of disregard Benedict Cumberbatch's acting. I over time I like him generally, and I like. Have you ever seen the rehearsals that he did when he did Smaug? And he's wearing the suit or whatever, and he's rehearsing for the film, like, I like that. I like him. But I've come to kinda disregard his acting is, like I think mainly it was because of that movie, The Power of the Dog that came out 2 years ago. I hated that movie. That movie made me very angry. I could only watch it for about 15 minutes, and then I turned it off. I hated that movie. But anyway, so so they gotta surveil him, and so they start surveilling him, and he's this brilliant mathematician, and they show him, and, he's giving a lecture, and he's got all the numbers behind him, and he's doing a Good Will Hunting, Matt Damon. Whoa, that's another movie with NSA. Remember, they Good Will Hunting, 1998, which was after this, of course, but at the end, they offer Matt Damon, a chance to work anywhere because of his brilliant, mathematical skills and his cryptography. They want him in cryptography working for NSA. They say that in the movie. But, uh, so anyway, they gotta surveil him, and there's some funny scenes of, they're spying on him and, like, there's some sort of, like, I don't know, German woman or she's Czech or something, and she comes in and she's seducing him, and they're filming him because they're trying to film his keystrokes so they can get his password. And then they break into the place and they find the black box, and the black box has been concealed inside of an answering machine. It's great. It's so 90s that it's about an answering machine. I told you when I saw Jerry Seinfeld with my friend that he said at the end, he said, are there any requests from the audience? And I yelled out, do your answering machine bit, because that was a norm thing. Uh, so they find it inside an answering machine. Now, uh, the MacGuffin, which is a Hitchcockian term, is the thing that you get in Pulp Fiction, right, with the briefcase, the 666 briefcase, which is the adreno that's been sucked out of Marcellus Wallace at the base of his skull again. But it's just a vehicle for the rest of the plot. Well, in this, it's described that way, and the critical analysis of the film often describes it as like the supreme MacGuffin, but it's actually not. It's a black cube, and the black box that the guy has is a code breaking device. It's a cipher. And what they figure out because they plug it in and Whisper reads the code through Braille, and it's nothing, nothing. And then third screen, he goes, "What is this?" And we see matrix code flowing. and he realizes that it's a code breaking device. So this is really interesting. This is probably the best part of the movie because the way that it's filmed is we see the reflection of the code in his glasses, and it's like he's been absorbed into the code matrix, and he says, "Whoa." So they tap into the Federal Reserve. They can track transactions, they can move money, and they do something else. I forget what the second thing they do is, but the third thing is they access they access the national power grid. They say, "You guys wanna shut down the power in Canada?" So it's I guess it's global power grid. But then they say, "Let's access flight patterns and air traffic control." 1992. So then Whisper says, "Hey, who wants to bring down an airliner?" And they go, shut it down." Because, I mean, really, they do have the thing. They have the uh, Prism Project, Snowden, Bill Binney device that shows that the NSA ultimately gets it, and the NSA wants it in this, but ultimately the actual NSA under James Earl Jones shows up at the end of the movie. They have the device that allows them uh, the panopticon. They can spy on anything, anywhere, and move anything at any time. And so we find out who are these guys working for? Well, they're actually working for a proto Sigma, Ben Kingsley. So Robert Redford gets kidnapped and he shows up and he gets knocked out by the two sort of nondescript looking agents. And then he is in Ben Kingsley's dungeon techno corridor with its LED purple soft lights, and it has a silent room. So he goes into the silent room and he tells him what it is. And Ben Kingsley is the character Cosmo. And Cosmo, who's Cosmo? Cosmo is Robert Redford's friend from the beginning of the movie who has spent all this time in prison. So he tells him, "When I was in prison, I learned that the world doesn't move on security and operations, it moves on the illusion of security." So he he furthered his hacking, he met certain groups of people there, and then that allowed him to get into this thing where now he's basically a Silicon Valley billionaire, Peter Peele style with Palantir. And Robert Redford gets dropped off. There's a view of he's at the top of what's the street in San Francisco where they filmed the real world, the curving street, and we see Alcatraz in the background. So what we're supposed to see there is that the fortress of Alcatraz, which we just saw recently in my Book of Eli stream. Remember we just did Book of Eli where the dystopia, post-apocalyptic dystopia ends in Alcatraz. So it's a fortress. And like the keep, which we also did analysis of, it's not just meant to keep everybody out, but it's meant to keep them in. So everything for the future is in there. So that's what that's supposed to symbolize. It's also that we're gonna be breaking into some sort of fortress, but the fortress is permeable. So we see Alcatraz in the background because it is a prison, and Ben Kingsley is has imprisoned himself in the Fortress Cathedral of Intelligence. At the end of the movie, remember, he says, we have this ability, we can go anywhere and do anything. And Robert Redford says, "I think you're going to find it a lonely place when you get there," which is, I mean, that's a good line in the movie. And we also are supposed to read into it that the fortress is permeable and you can break into it, just like the Palantir Panopticon device, the Prism device is meant to break through the fortress of encrypted data. So now we got to find out where he is. So they can't really figure it out. But Robert Redford's like, okay, there were bumps here in the road, and then it sounded like a cocktail party. Whisper is able to match this with what he can visualize, even though he's blind. He's like the sort of Tiresias blind seer of the film, right? Because his other senses are attuned and he knows the sounds of the streets. The one thing that's cool is like it's a lighthearted movie. In fact, the movie was supposed to be rated G, but they purposefully added in sexual innuendo and cuss words so that it wouldn't be because it's not a children's movie. And when he says the thing about the cocktail party is because they go by a gaggle of geese. And then they eventually come to this place where they're in Silicon Valley in the early 90s. And this thing called the internet is ramping up. And there is a kind of Fort Meade looking mirrored building that says something about like Toy Corporation. And they say, no, this is a toy corporation. He says, no, that's got Cosmo written all over it. He obviously works there. And that's interesting because all of this is all a game to them. I mean, the guys are sneakers because they're sneaking. They're sneaking, and they're contracted by banks and intelligence and all these groups to code break and to physically break in. And the physical breaking into the buildings is supposed to be analogous. That's the analog version of the future digital version of breaking into the fortress of ones and zeros, which is what Ben Kingsley says later, that everything's ones and zeros. Right? It's just numbers. It's just Matthew McConaughey. It's just Matthew McConaughey numbers, right? In Wolf of Wall Street. Um, so they track him there. They put a camera system up. They track all the people that come in and out, and then they realize that his office is the River Phoenix goes to the to City Records, and he pays off a guy and gets the blueprint for the building, and then they see that the light in the corner office never goes off, and that's Ben Kingsley's office. So they got to find a way into this building, right? Because Ben Kingsley now has the black box, and they got to get it back. So they get Steven Jablonsky or whatever, that dude from remember in Groundhog Day? Hey, Ned. Ned? Remember that guy? What's his real name? Steven Jablonsky or whatever? That guy works next to it. So now they have to use the one woman in their group who is Mary Steenburgen in beta version to Sparrow, the guy, to she's gonna be the sort of lightweight um non-sexed up version of a Felix Springmeier MK beta sex kitten. And she's gonna seduce Steven Jablonsky, who is a total chicken neck ninny beta, and get the password to get in. And the password to get in is a vocal password. It's a vocal keypad. It says like, "Hi, I'm Steven Jablonsky. My voice is my password. Verify." So she's got to get him to say all the code words, and they go to a dim sum palace and they eat Chinese food. And this guy's just a total slob. Um, but one thing is, it's like Robert Redford says, "Oh, so we went through his garbage. This guy's the most uninteresting man in the world, right? He works at the toy corporation. He has no friends. He has no family." Then they go to his apartment, and this guy's got a Nagel hanging up on the wall. He's got a Patrick Nagel. I mean, he's not that boring, right? Um, also, he sources out. He susses out that Beta Steenbergen is has made him say these weird words because she's trying to break into his office. So he sounds the alarm, goes to the office, brings her along, strong arms her in and says, somebody's trying to break into my office. This sets off alarm bells in the toy corp, and they realize that River Phoenix has broken into the building. River Phoenix is so cool. I mean, he just is. He's just he's just cool. Like, has he ever been was he ever in anything where he wasn't cool? If he was, let me know. He was young Indiana Jones. He was little Nikita. He purposely did this movie because it was right after, My Own Private Idaho, which we discussed in the was it King Lear stream? Because remember, there's a group of Shakespearean hobo demon bums, including Flea, who are, like, putting on of they are like Shakespearean actors. And anyway, so he did this movie after My Own Private Idaho because he said that he'd just done a psychotic movie and now he wanted to do something lightweight. So he did this movie and he's really fucking good. He's really good in it. And so he breaks in and he messes with uh the electrical system and the heating system, and he makes it so that like the office has heat sensors, which is like it's at 96. So Robert Redford has to break into the office and move 2 feet. You can't move more than 2 feet or no, 2 inches per second because then the heat sensors will go off. Now you realize that Mission Impossible stole this. right, because that's what Tom Coon was doing when he had to break in, and he had to fall down the thing, and John Reno's holding the thing at the mainframe in CIA when they break into CIA. It's the same sort of thing here, but it's more believable here because it's just heat sensors in the office. So he's got to get in. He finds the black box. He gets it. He takes it, and then they sound the alarms. And Ben Kingsley says, he says, Bishop, Marty. That's how he says his name. Marty, Marty. I know you're here, Marty. And he's got like the tiniest man bun ponytail ever. I mean, he really does look the part in this. He's wearing the kind of uh gray static Sigma early 90s aesthetic in his neon office, and he's post boomer who's now, of course, moved into Silicon Valley, and he wants to destroy the world, but he's also an uber socialist terrorist who probably knows Hans Gruber personally. So, um, so anyway, what ends up happening is, uh, he gets out onto the ceiling of the building. He's going to let him go. Oh, he also tried to. He says, "I can't." He says, "I can't kill my best friend. Kill my best friend." He's totally psychotic. He's been traumatized by losing in the power to the people Greenpeace fight, and he's gone off to prison um where he met what's the guy's name with the Ponzi scheme? Um, what's that boomer's name? The New York Ponzi scheme guy that Pacino played. Fuck, what's that guy's name? Anyway, he met him, I guess. Kinda like how Chaz Manson met the mafia guys there, and he's gone off to be, NSA guy, uh, he's not an NSA guy, but he is basically running parallel with them, and he's obviously in league with intelligence, and anyway, Robert Redford gets away. He gets away with the black box. And then they go back to their home base. They got away, which is weird because they go back to the same building where they were. That's the same. These little plot holes annoy me because that's what happened in 6 Days of the Condor in the book. It's like when they got invaded by the mailman MK Delta, who's psycho looking hit squad guy, Phoenix program guy who showed up to kill them. They shoot him and then they stay for 15 minutes at the house trying to sort stuff out. There are even details in the book. It's like, oh, then Malcolm went upstairs and washed his face. Then they got their supplies together. It's like, don't they? Is there no situational awareness here? Where thank you, Madoff, where he made off with their money. Am I right? Where when you do something like that, you gotta peace out, dude, immediately, right? But don't go back to the same warehouse where the guy knows you are in the first place. They had a meeting there, right? Wouldn't Ben Kingsley just go, okay, well, they just went back to the warehouse, send the guys over there and take it again. Whatever. They go back there, and James Earl Jones is there, and he says, "I'm from the CI, from the NSA," and they say, "Yeah, right," and he's like, "No, I really am," and give me the black box, but they're able to make a deal with them. So Dan Aykroyd gets his Winnebago. I want a Winnebago, burgundy interior. River Phoenix's wish from the genie is to go out with the kind of Ming looking uh, girl holding the machine gun as part of the security division. It's like this girl, so he wants to go out on a date with her. Wishes for peace on earth and goodwill towards men. Good for him. Um, and Robert Redford wishes for his record to be cleared because he's got Bishop has a fake name and he wishes for his record to be cleared and all that stuff. And they get away, but they get away with the black box. But then again, so Robert Redford got away with the black box. Then he got away with the black box again. Then he gets away with the microchip that holds all the operating data for the black box. And the end of the movie is that as a news again, it ends with the news. It's really weird. Just like 3 Days of the Condor. I'm gonna publish this, but it's a guy on the nightly news saying the RNC experienced like some sort of weird catastrophic losses, and The and Greenpeace and a couple other, NGOs and organizations got some big donations this week. And you're like, okay. So, in other words, um, this movie is important, and I would say up there in the sort of signpost monolithic pantheon of big movies that stand for and show us both predictive programming, social engineering, and a revelatory insight into the intelligence apparatus, because it shows you that the characters are not always, in fact, it's probably more true to life, because it shows you that the characters are sort of average looking people, but that have extraordinary connections to the rest of the pyramid system, and that the bad guys are seen as the good guys, but are the bad guys, and the good guys aren't always the good guys. In fact, they're working for the bad guys, and that it's all sort of one big amoral system of control. So that's my take on Sneakers. I would recommend watching that. It's a great movie. So that's about it, y'all. I mean, that comes to the end of our Robert Redford CIA trilogy. And just like, we have these actors now who seem to have um, explicit connections to intelligence groups like Ben Affleck, right? With, the accountant and the sum of all fears. And in fact, the director of Sneakers is the sum of all fears director. So just like that, we also have these older figures who are patricians in this sense, especially now, like Robert Redford, who seem to make movies that criticize the system, but actually somehow play into just another arm of furthering it through limited hangout and other means. So that's about it, guys. And again, that's 6 Days of the Condor. Tom Clancy's Without Remorse is a book that I just talked about briefly, but this is a great book. It's a thick book, but you can read it in a few hours, and it's really good. Jack Higgins' season in hell is great. Coming up, we'll be doing I don't know, a bunch of stuff. I just started reading American Gods, so we'll be doing that by Neil Gaiman. That was a sponsored stream. If you want to sponsor a stream, drop me $100 via PayPal or Cash App, and give me some ideas for things to cover. We got everybody who's donated for sponsored streams. Don't worry, I've still got those coming up. We've got summer coming up, y'all. It's summertime. Thank goodness. It's been a heck of a year. Been a heck of a year. The good and the bad. But that's living. You got to keep LIVIN. So it's been a heck of a year, and we got summer coming up. I'll be going away this summer for a little bit to go down south, spend some time with my sister. Um, and that'll be a lot of fun while I'm down there. I can't, I'm trying to figure out what I need to take going down there, but I'm going to do some streams while I'm down there, and probably cover Robert Redford and other things. Remember when I just been down there last time, we did Cormac McCarthy's The Passenger, because it's set um, near past Christiane down there, down south. Got a bunch of other stuff to cover. If you've got ideas for things you want me to cover, please drop me a comment after the video. You can email me, madmaximalism2x's at gmail.com. Drop me a comment on Instagram. Please follow me on Instagram, Bazed Lit Analyzer. Please go back and watch my stream I just did with Jay on Network. Watch the movie streams, the movie analysis streams that I've done with our friend David Patrick Harry at Church of the Eternal Logos. Please go back and look at my community tab and check out the radio interviews I did on Alternate Current Radio and TNT Radio Live. Hopefully we'll be doing another boiler room soon with Hesher, our good friend out there, Hesher, who is down there in South Texas covering the shenanigans right now. Hope he stays safe out there. Peace to him. Got a lot of stuff in the works. So I think that's about it. Shouts out to our friend Jason out there who dropped $15 on PayPal right before the stream. Thank you so much, homeboy. Really appreciate you as always. Big supporter here, Jason. Big supporter. Shouts out to our girl Amptown, who's always a big supporter, dropping those super chats and being here with us. Let me look and see if I got anything else on here real quick. Never shows up where it's supposed to. So give me a second here. Hope y'all are doing well on this Saturday night. Is it Saturday? What night is this? Is it a weeknight? Saturday night. um, yeah, shouts out again to Elias who drops 20 bucks super chat. Thank you so much. Let's see. I think I gave a shout out to Roscoe last time, 30 bucks Canadian. Yes, I did. Shouts out to Circle G who sends 2 bucks. Annapolis is better. Super chat. And I think that's about it, you guys. Oh, yo, shouts out to our homeboy Evan, who drops 20 bucks on Dono Chat. Says, my favorite channel. Thanks, BLA. Hey, thank you so much, Evan. I really appreciate that. That's very kind of you. Very kind and very generous. You are officially a Bazed. What do we call ourselves? A blazed. You are officially a blazed uh, blazed basement analyzer. No, a blazed basement breathalyzer. I don't know. You're official in my books. So thank you so much. If you want to support me, don't forget you can look at the video description, channel description, and support me anytime, 24/7, all the time. PayPal, Cash App, Venmo. You can super chat me here. You can drop money on the dono chats. I'll read your comments. If you want me to do a sponsor stream, you can drop me some fat bucks. If you want me to do more movies, drop me some fat bucks. Hope everybody's doing well out there. It's a it's a nice Saturday, and I'm glad to spend my time with y'all. So if you're watching this later, please don't forget to smash that like, share the stream. I really appreciate all the people who support me and share the stream out there. We're trying to build here. I mean, we're doing well. You know, we got 100,000 plus views, 2,000 plus subs in 1 year, and from the ground up. Thanks to my friends out there, especially shouts out to Jethro. So shouts out to everybody out there. Thank you so much for being here. And I love y'all. And to play us out, here's Sting and a cut off his new album. Take it away. No, like Sam Hyde says, leave. Well, he says something else, but he says, don't forget to leave a comment. Oh, speaking of which, before I go, I almost forgot this. Um, uh, uh, mm, oh, shouts out to Buster out there who drops 10 bucks via Venmo. Thank you so much, Buster. I really appreciate you. You guys, I this is totally off topic, but I was like last weekend, I was totally obsessed with this. Have you guys been watching Fish Tank? I mean, I think people have kind of been off and on, because of I mean, there was so much activity that their system crashed, and then it was on YouTube and now it's back to the website. But like last weekend, I honestly think this like watching Frank Castle on Fish Tank is one of the best things I've ever seen. It was so good. I mean, honestly, like I'm not going to try and analyze it, but I'll just say that that shit to me was like avant garde next level. I mean, that was crazy. That was so awesome. He busted in there and in 2 hours managed to completely annihilate the house. Frank Castle is like he's like a medieval archetypal figure or something. He's like Juggernaut. He is so big and he is so like you can just watch that dude like his streams are so I mean it's legend. And that was just I don't know. I don't even know how to describe it. If you saw it, you saw it. And I did see Mick, sent this to me today that our homeboy Alex Stein and what's Alex Stein's friend's name? Oh my god. Hold on, I gotta look it up. I can't remember. Remember Alex Stein gave me a nice shout out back in the day. It was almost a year ago on the Crucible. Shouts out to Andy out there who got Stein to give me that. I saved it. That awesome shout out, which was of a high point. Um, what is Alex Stein's friend's name, you guys? Dontarius. Yeah, I just remembered. Yeah, so Alex Stein went in the house with Dontarius. I was like fast forwarding through it, like to get a random bit. Not that I was fast forwarding to watching, but I just did that to find, just to hit on some random bits because I knew it would be funny. And I fast forwarded, and all of a sudden I saw Alex. Alex is screaming at somebody in the hallway. And anyway, that was good. Shouts out to our friend out there, Alex Stein, and Dontarius. But yeah, go back and watch Frank Castle annihilating the fish tank house. And and that was really good. So that was entertaining. Um, who says love Frank Castle though? He's an artist, definitely an artist. He is a true living artist. I mean, that was like we don't have words for what happened. I mean, it was so incredible. It's like performance art. I mean, it's next level avant-garde shit. So that was cool. So anyway, thanks for being here, you guys. I love y'all. And to play us out, here's Sting and cut off his new album. All right. Take it away.
Visual 117, terminate 118, 118, 2, 117.